Italian Billionaire's Stubborn Lover. The Romano Brothers series, Book 1. Written by Leslie North. Read by Connor Brown. 1. Adeline. Adeline Peluso tapped her stiletto heel nervously on the rust-covered terracotta tile floor as she traced her perfectly manicured fingernail over her plump bottom lip. Blinking, she contemplated the choice before her. She could stay in Sicily or let go of her dreams and move on. "Pooh," she said, frowning at her laptop where it lay open on the ancient walnut desk that was large enough and heavy enough to double as a raft on choppy seas. Between her eyes was a small, pinched crease of consternation that had plagued her with compliments of adorable and sweet ever since she had been a young girl. Now at 29, it was no less cute, but in truth, she was actually quite frustrated. The beauty of her surroundings, which normally worked wonders to lighten her mood, did nothing for her today. From outside the tall, open windows of a real estate office, the calming sound of waves lapping against the Sicilian shore reached her ears. But instead of making her thankful for the life she had lived, as it usually did, it made her wistful for the adventures she was missing by remaining on the island of Sicily. Moving to Sicily had been a dream come true for Adeline. Its history and heritage were more diverse than even the home she had left behind in America. It was in Sicily that she had learned how to live with gusto and verve, and she had treasured the summers she'd spent there with her grandparents. Though they were gone now, it was through their happy marriage in this beautiful place that she'd learned what lifelong love looked like. She had thought that she could capture some of the magic of their lives by moving to Sicily. It had been her childhood dream. She'd thought that she would find love and adventure. Instead, she had an empty apartment to go home to at night, and her life was filled with the same bored routine that she'd left behind in America. She needed adventure. She needed more from life. It was too amazing to sleepwalk through. "I could find love in Spain," she said. Crossing her legs, she tapped her toe silently in the air as she contemplated her choices. After clicking a web page for the Romano del Mare, she sat back again, then frowned. Images of the once beautiful resort hotel filled her computer screen. It was the place where her grandparents would summer every year that she'd come to visit. While her grandparents were who taught her how to live and love life, the Romano del Mare was where she had learned those things. It was a place of wonder and artful magnificence. At over 870 years old, the converted medieval monastery was grandeur in an understated old-world style. There wasn't any glitter, gold, or tinsel. No, the resort was stately and honorable, yet charming and inviting. It, and the memory of her grandparents, was what made Sicily so hard to leave. Giving up on the Romano del Mare was like giving up on the dream of finding love, and it broke Adeline's heart. She clicked another tab, and a new full page of images filled her screen. They were again of the Romano del Mare, except that in these pictures, the Grand Hotel had crumbling rock bricks, broken windows, and an empty parking lot. The old girl hadn't seen a customer in nearly a decade. After the hotel's former owners had gotten too old to handle its management themselves, they'd handed it over to a management company that had been disgraceful in its duties. They'd allowed the resort to become what it was today, a broken-down memory of happier times. The Romano del Mare was now an embarrassment and an eyesore to the community, and it was why Adeline had accepted a position with Vero Immobiliare Real Estate 8 months ago. They held the account for the Romano del Mare. Adeline popped her elbow on her desk, put her chin in her hand, and sighed. A heritage and restoration dispute had been waged for months over the property, but the hotel had finally been approved for sale and, shockingly, for demolition. Through it all, Adeline had sent email after email to the new owners, pleading with them to restore the hotel themselves, rather than let it fall to the sea or to new big commerce. Her eyes stung with tears. She couldn't stay to witness the destruction of the place she had cherished most. The Romano del Mare was a symbol of everything that was good in life, and the love she hoped to someday find. It was time to leave. She would accept the position of real estate ambassador in Spain, specializing in Americans buying abroad. Clicking the internet tab that housed the application for the position in Spain, she bit her lip and then clicked send. The application was just a formality. She already had the job. The company had personally reached out to her and asked her to apply, assuring her that they were very excited and interested in the talents that she would bring. After all, she was the most successful real estate agent in Sicily. A light rap pulled Adeline's attention to the door, where a tall man stood leaning slightly in. He was classically handsome, with a strong jawline and a strong but flattering nose. His thick, black hair was shorter on the sides than it was on top, and was slicked back in a look that was more severe than the gentle kindness of his face. His skin bore the golden touch of the sun. "Buongiorno." The well-dressed man took a step inside Adeline's office. His voice was a rich tenor, in need of a choir. Dressed impeccably in a three-piece charcoal gray suit with tiny red pinstripes, he wore it as well as any model could. But everything about how he held himself made Adeline think he was a businessman. "I know him. From where?" Adeline rose and made her way from behind her desk to greet her guest. A greeting of ciao was on her lips, but her spinning mind delayed it. Then the stranger smiled, the sight charming and disarming, and everything fell into place. Adeline's deep brown eyes flew wide and she stopped. "Now you come home," she exclaimed, throwing her hands up into the air and stamping her foot. "What took you so long?" Awaiting an answer, she put her hands on her hips and gave the man a glare that could have melted gelato. 2. Nicolo. Nicolo Romano held his hand against his abdomen as he flicked a glance over his shoulder. He was surprised to find that there was no one standing behind him. Turning to face forward, he took in the spirited woman before him. He'd been directed to her office to discuss the sale of the long-abandoned resort recently inherited by him and his brothers. Yet upon his arrival, Ms. Peluso's face flooded with color. Its hot pink blush did nothing to hide her beauty. Her petite build was slender, but had all the curves of a woman. Her light brown hair was streaked with gold, and her pencil skirt showed off just enough of her supple legs to make Nicolo's hands crave to trace over them. Even at a glance, he could tell that she had a fiery soul that only the luckiest of men would get the chance to try to tame. "I am sorry," Nicolo said, putting a hand over his chest. "Perhaps you have me mistaken for another. I am Nicolo—" "Oh, I know who you are. Nicolo Romano, the owner of the Romano del Mare." He knew her name to be Adeline Peluso from the sign on her office door. It was a good Sicilian name, yet while she looked Sicilian to his eyes, she did not sound Sicilian to his ears. "I am sorry. Have I done something to offend?" This was not the reception he had anticipated. He'd been assured that Ms. Peluso was the very best that the agency had to offer. And while the resort was now dilapidated, its sale would still make any agent who handled the transaction a lot of money. "Sit," Adeline instructed, pointing to a richly upholstered armless chair sitting before her desk. While not used to taking orders from women, beautiful or otherwise, Nicolo was intrigued by what she'd have to say, and this was, after all, her office. So he sat. Unbuttoning his coat jacket with one hand, he crossed his legs and cupped his palms over his knee. "Mr. Romano, as I'm sure you know, the Romano del Mare is in terrible disrepair," Adeline said, as she made her way around the room. She fetched a binder from an antique shelf and placed it atop the desk before continuing her search through an assortment of other items. Her scavenger hunt finally seemed to come to an end when she retrieved a small, dusty tin off the top of a curio. She had to stand on her tiptoes to reach it and stretch to her lith's body maximum length. Romano knew that he should offer his assistance, but he was enjoying the view so much that he kept his mouth closed and stayed seated where she'd put him. Ms. Peluso, you're not telling me anything that I do not know. Well, did you know that I have been sending you emails with projections and estimates for the last 8 months regarding its renovation? Adeline asked from where she stood facing him with the small tin in her hands. All her weight was on one leg, with her other lovely leg extended to the side, and Nicolo's mind flashed to an image of her delicate ankle held in his hand as he kissed his way up. I must be overdue for a lover. I'm acting like a schoolboy, Nicolo chided himself. At 29, his school days were long behind him, and now he was an internationally respected real estate developer. He had been to the Romano del Mare, the resort that his grandfather had inherited from his grandfather's grandfather. He knew its history, and he also knew the sad state that it was now in. Not only was it in horrible disrepair, it also required extensive modernizing in order to meet the expectations of today's vacationer. The resort, in his very knowledgeable opinion, needed to be destroyed. There was no saving it. Miss Peluso, I apologize. I never received your correspondence. Adeline gave Nicolo an "are you kidding me" look. Nicolo bravely continued. My assistant weeds out. My assistant only forwards on to me correspondence that is actionable and business-related. Adeline's expression transformed into something much less polite than what it had been a moment ago, and Nicolo glanced out her office door to see if anyone else was around. If she happened to start throwing things at him, he hoped that there would be someone else who could intervene, so that he would not be forced to restrain a woman he had only just met. Business, Adeline said, visibly struggling to regulate the tone of her voice. Mr. Romano, I assure you, this is all about business. Picking up the heavy binder off her desk, she plopped it onto Nicolo's lap. That binder contains the projected estimates of what it would take to return the Romano del Mare back to how it was in its glory days. Nicolo kept his gaze lifted to watch Adeline and did nothing to open the binder in his lap. Her face tightened in confusion, and the most adorable, pinched line appeared between her brows. He wanted to kiss it. Mr. Romano, Adeline prompted with a wave of her hand at the binder in his lap. Still, Nicolo did not open it. I am well aware of the financials regarding the Romano del Mare. I know that it has millions of euros worth of fines levied against it since having fallen into disuse. The property is now owned by myself and my brothers, he said, speaking in a slow, measured tone in hopes that it would give his words more weight. And we believe that it is in our best interests to sell the property and pay off the fines. If we attempted to renovate the property instead of selling it, we would be faced with the burden of those fines as well as the cost of the renovation. The math does not support renovating the property, Ms. Peluso. He held the unopened binder out in invitation for her to take it back. She did not comply. Mr. Romano, as Adeline said his name, her entire body softened, and her once tart voice grew silky and fluid. She moved to him and knelt before him in one easy motion. Nicolo blinked. He had never been disarmed in a fight so easily by anyone. From where she knelt, staring up at him with her beautiful, imploring eyes, it was all that he could do not to throw the binder to the side, slide his hand behind her neck to cup her head, and pull her in for a kiss. Yes, he asked. The sound of his name on her lips was undoing him. Look, she said, and flipped the cover of the binder open. Doing as she'd bid, Nicolo looked down, then he blinked again. These numbers can't be accurate. It was a comprehensive list of renovations needed by the Romano del Mare to make it a commercially viable property once again, plus the quotes of contractors willing to do the jobs. The quotes were way too low. No matter how beautiful Ms. Peluso was, business was business, and Nicolo was not willing to throw good money away just because someone he had never met before and who had no connection to the resort wanted to see it restored.
They are, I swear. I've personally spoken with every contractor on that list. And look,
she said again, turning several pages in the binder. Nicolo jerked his head back in surprise at what he saw.
Is this real?
It is,
Adeline said, excitement growing in her voice. Nicolo leaned in, studying the words and watching for signs that they might change of their own accord. What he was reading was simply too unbelievable. The local council has offered a referendum forgiving some of the fines if we proceed with the restoration? How did you get this?
I get the opportunity to work with a large variety of people in my line of work, Mr. Romano,
Adeline said, smiling up at him. It took a whole heartbeat for Nico to regain his resolve. A span of time infinitely longer than any other persuader had ever achieved. No, he said, slamming the folder closed, but Adeline had it open again just as fast.
Look, she demanded.
With a heavy sigh, he looked back down at the folder, this time to find mock-up after mock-up of what the resort could look like after the renovations Adeline was suggesting. Seeing it made him pause for a whole 3 beats of his heart. He did remember the resort in its heyday. He had spent 1 year there in the care and company of his grandparents, and it had been hands down the best year of his life. Nothing else had ever come close. After that year, it had been back to living off of his mother's private plane. His mother was a beautiful woman, very beautiful, and she had built her initial fortune by modeling around the world. She was savvy and shrewd, and she had listened more than talked when on the arm of an important businessman discussing matters with other business moguls. By the time Nicolo had entered her life, she'd had a small fleet of private planes, offering unique and private services to the rich and powerful. She became the hostess who could turn the most tenuous of business meetings into a sure success, and that talent had made her wealthy beyond measure and independent as well. While she had started out as a young Sicilian girl, she'd eventually claimed the world as her home, and she never stopped anywhere long enough for roots to take hold. It was a lesson that Nicolo had learned well. Like his mother, he never stopped traveling. He didn't allow the roots of his past to anchor him down, and all new roots were ripped free as soon as he took to the skies again. He needed no one, and he certainly didn't need the tie to his past that Ms. Peluso was attempting to harness him with. The Romano del Mare was a burden he didn't want and didn't need. She would simply have to accept that. Miss Adeline, Nicolo said, closing the binder. This time when he closed it, he left his hand resting on its top so that Adeline could not throw it open once more. I appreciate that you are so passionate about my family's resort. Maybe if it had someone like you seeing to its care instead of the horrific management company that ran it into bankruptcy, the Romano del Mare would still be the gem of Sicily that it once was. But he shook his head, allowing his personal sadness to show through. That is not where we are today. I can see it is unlikely that we will be on the same page as to how to proceed with the sale of the resort. And while I have been assured that you are the most capable of handling its sale, I think it is best that I request another agent to manage it. Adeline's lips pursed, and her eyes narrowed, clearly unhappy. Nicolo extended a hand to Adeline as an offer to help her stand. To his relief, she accepted by sliding her slender fingers over his palm. Giving in to the risk of offending her, Nicolo leaned forward and kissed her knuckles while he kept his eyes locked with hers. She didn't quite smile when his lips pressed themselves against her soft flesh, but there was a twinkle in her eye that gave him hope that she might someday see him as something more than a business adversary. Once Adeline had regained her feet, Nicolo stood as well. Instead of offering the binder to her, thereby giving her the chance to refuse it, he instead placed it upon her desk.
You can, of course, transfer me off of your service, Adeline said. But you must make and follow through on one promise first. After that, if you decide that you still want to work with another agent, I won't fight you.
Twisting at the waist, she picked up the rectangular tin from the desk. Even though it was small, she held it in both hands as she offered it to him. There was something in the way she stood and in her expression. It was as if she were giving him the most fragile, precious gift anyone could ever give, and a part of him found it unfathomable to reject it. So he took the small tin from her hands and held its edge pressed against his chest.
"Don't look at it now,"
Adeline said, taking a fast step away as if to get herself out of arm's reach so that he would not be able to give the small tin back.
"Look at it when you're in a quiet place, when it's just you, and you can give some time to it."
There was nothing left to say, and Nicolo knew it. Adeline Peluso had won this battle. He would win the war, though, and he would see the Romano del Mare sold off for eventual demolition. It was a prime location, and would be an excellent property for the right developer. But not for him. There were too many memories there. There was nothing he could do with the property beside try to make it into what it once was. But those days were gone. It was best that he walk away from the best memories of his life, just as it was best that he walk away from the beautiful Adeline Peluso. 3. Nicolo. As soon as Nicolo entered his room at the Veruda resort, he began stripping out of his clothes, and he did not stop until he was dressed in a pair of jeans and a black designer tee that buttoned up the front. Both fit him like a glove. The jeans, because he had worn them so much that they had molded themselves to the shape of his body, and the tee, because that was what it was designed to do. With his suit hung up, he headed out to his private balcony to give his brother Leonardo a call with an update regarding the selling of the Romano del Mare. Interwoven, woody stalks of mature grapevines filtered soft light over a small breakfast table. The vines' large leaves provided ample shading against the growing heat of the afternoon sun. And when the season was right, the vines would provide a ready treat of grapes for anyone who stayed in the room. Nicolo took a moment to appreciate the artistry of it, before propping up his iPad on the small round table before him, putting the small tin Adeline had given him to one side. The table itself had a mosaic top, made from broken ceramic shards, laid in a pattern to depict the harvesting of grapes. It was a nice touch, but the resort's eye for detail was a personal reminder to Nicolo of his family's failure. It was not in his nature to walk away from a challenge, let alone accept failure. But it was in his nature to make business decisions with his head. Allowing his business acumen to be charmed by the wishes of his heart was not what his mother had taught him. His father had been a foolish man when it came to business matters, and he would not follow in his footsteps. Nicolo would do what needed to be done, and he would do it with the welfare of his family in mind. It just was the way it was. It wasn't personal. It was business. He wasn't sure that it was a sentiment that his grandfather would have approved of, but it was the only way he knew to succeed in life. Simply put, failure to sell the Romano del Mare would cost the brothers millions. It was a price too steep to pay simply to honor his heritage. Nicolo navigated the iPad's interface and then initiated a call. A moment later, he was greeted with the image of the oldest of his two brothers, Leonardo. "Ciao," Nicolo said in greeting with a quick and easy smile. "Ciao," Leonardo said, suave as always. If it could be argued that one brother was more handsome than the other, Leonardo had a chance of edging Nicolo out. Tall, lanky, and leaner than his brothers, age had given his features a little more definition with light creases around his eyes, but it somehow added to how handsome he was rather than took away. "How is Sicily, brother? Is it as beautiful as I remember?" Leonardo asked. "To find that out, you'll have to come to see for yourself," Nicolo chuckled. "But you are my eyes and my ears, little brother. I trust you." Nicolo's face fell. "What is it?" his brother asked. "It is every bit as beautiful as you remember. I could argue that it is even more beautiful. The air is so clean here. The people, I get smiles and claps on my back as if I've lived here all along. I hate to admit it, but I've missed this place." Leonardo gave a one-shoulder shrug. "Then stay," he said, emphasizing the words with an upturned lift of his hands before him. "You've been jet-setting for too long. It's time to stay in one place for a while. Fix your internal clock to one time zone for once."
Nicolo laughed. I have no problem with my internal clock. I sleep at night wherever that may be. Okay, then. Why the long face if you have no interest in staying a while? Nicolo looked out over the landscape before answering. His resort was outside of town, so his balcony afforded him a sweeping view of the landscape. It was arid and rocky, but there were trees and closely grazed meadows, too, in which he could make out the fluffy outline of sheep. They looked like slow-moving cotton balls from where he sat. There was this girl, Nicolo finally answered, returning his attention to the iPad. Nicolo's confession was met with an uproarious bark of laughter from his brother, and Nicolo smiled, despite the fun that Leonardo was having at his expense. Of course there was, Leonardo said, when he finally gotten his mirth under control. So tell me, who is this girl? She's not some mafia daughter, is she? No, Nicolo answered, waving a hand at the iPad in dismissal. She is our real estate agent for the Romano del Mare, except she doesn't want to sell it. She wants us to restore it. This time, there was no laughter from Leonardo. Is she mad? He exclaimed. The fines alone would bury us. She's thought of that, too. She obtained the promise from the council to have the fines lowered or in some cases even dismissed, if we restore the resort. Leonardo's brows were up, his interest clearly piqued. Maybe this girl is worth listening to. Okay, it's you who's gone mad, Nicolo said. He felt yanked like a yo-yo between whether it was best to renovate the hotel or whether it was best to cut their losses and be done with the place. Everything within him said to cut and run. Taking on the renovation would tie him to Sicily in a way that he wasn't ready for. Wait, hear me out. The fines will strip away any lasting benefits to us selling the Romano del Mare. We will be lucky to break even. But what if we made a few of the more economical improvements to the property? Some of the fines would be reduced, and we would have a chance to make something out of this. Our grandfather's legacy would actually amount to something that way, instead of being washed away by the sea. Nicolo studied his brother's face. What else is there that you are not saying? Leonardo shrugged one shoulder again. Nothing I haven't already said. When was the last time you stayed in one place for longer than a month? An alert popped up on Nicolo's iPad. Leaning forward, he navigated away from the video call in order to check the incoming message. He pursed his lips upon seeing it, and then returned to the video call. What is it? What's happened to now? Leonardo asked. Do you know that development job I put in for? The one in India? Yeah. The offer came in. The job's mine if I want it. That's great, Leonardo exclaimed, and then added, Isn't it? I thought it was what you wanted. As a career builder, it is a great opportunity. The size of the projects he'd been taking on had been growing steadily. This job would propel him into the elite 1% of site developers. People would do their best to entice him to work for them, rather than him having to vie for jobs. Yet, as the projects he'd tackled had gotten bigger and bigger, he'd realized something surprising about himself. He enjoyed working on smaller, community-relevant projects more than he did internationally significant ones. But working on smaller development projects had career limitations that he wasn't willing to accept. So why the hesitation? Leonardo paused, and then answered the question for him. Maybe that job is what you think you should do, rather than what you want to do. Of course. Overseeing the development of a 500 million euro site, that's the worst thing that could happen to me. Nicolo was going for sarcastic, but a note of sincerity crept its way into his otherwise flippant answer. And maybe it is, Leonardo countered, with the same heated vehemence he had when debating the outcome of a championship football game. When is it that they need to have an answer about whether or not you accept the job? End of next month, but no buts. Take some time for you. Get to know this girl who's caught your eye, and keep your feet on the ground for more than a week. It will be good for you. Nicolo wasn't ready to commit. His gaze drifted to the tin that sat off to the side on the table. It was out of Leonardo's view, but maybe it was time to take a look at what Adeline had considered the crown of her argument for him to renovate the Romano del Mare, instead of tearing it down. Dragging the tin toward him with the tip of his finger, Nicolo brought it into view of the iPad's video camera.
What's that?
The girl gave it to me. She told me to look at it when I was alone, quiet and calm.
Leonardo snorted.
You going to open it now, or wait until never?
Now will do, Nicolo answered, shooting his brother a crooked grin. He pried the tin's snug off with his fingertips. The tin was old and of a decorative nature. It was the type of tin that fruitcakes were sometimes given in, and when the lid finally let go of its purchase on the lower half of the old box, there was a small pop. Nicolo leaned forward to get a better look at its contents.
What is it?
Leonardo asked. Nicolo was speechless as he pulled out an old black and white photograph of their grandfather as a young man standing next to their grandmother. Their grandfather was in a suit, their grandmother was in a wedding dress, and they were standing in front of the Romano del Mare. That little vixen, Nicolo said, pulling out the photograph and holding it up so that Leonardo could see. She's going right for the jugular.
Leonardo leaned closer to the camera, causing his face to grow larger and up close in Nicolo's iPad screen.
Is that Nano and Nana? Yeah, Nicolo answered, but his attention had already shifted to the next picture. It was again a picture of Nano and Nana, but this time they were playing in the water in front of the resort, and they had a young child with them. Look at this one, he said, holding it up for the camera. Leonardo gave a low whistle. Where did she get these? No idea. He pulled out another photo. In this one, their grandfather was slightly older, and so was their son.
The son, Nicolo and Leonardo's father, was dressed in his university gown. It looked as though he had just graduated.
There were more pictures after that. Some of them were of Nicolo's family, but other pictures were of the resort and the many celebrations that had been held there. Nicolo studied a picture of a wedding and noted the generational families present. He was sure he saw children, parents, grandparents, and even great-grandparents, not to mention the countless cousins, uncles, and aunts. People would have traveled far and wide to attend the event, bringing an influx of cash and opportunity to the locals. Now, the Romano del Mare was gone, and in its absence was a void that had not been filled. Even with the resort he was staying at, he'd have to drive almost an hour to reach it. There was nothing to match the grand fineness of the Romano del Mare anywhere near the city. It had been an iconic resort for the region for decades before mismanagement had taken it away. This place has been important to a lot of people, he said to himself, more than to Leonardo. He wondered at how many people had lost their jobs when the resort had closed its doors. He wondered at the economic hardship to the nearest towns that must have followed. On an island, any island, the chance to build a better life could be hard to find. For decades, the Romano del Mare had offered that chance, and it was a failing of the Romano family that the opportunities provided by the resort had been taken away. It was a knowledge that did not sit well with Nicolo. What are you going to do? Leonardo asked. I'm going to think about the unthinkable, he said, before taking a deep breath. And I'm going to stay. For a week, at least. 4. Adeline. Adeline glanced at her watch. She had long ago made it a rule to never allow a prospective buyer to arrive at a site before her. And even though she had no desire to see this particular property sell, she still made the point of being on location before anyone else, as she hoped to derail Nicolo's plans to destroy a building nearly 1,000 years old. Looming behind Adeline, and to one side, the Romano del Mare resort was imposing, even in its broken-down condition. It was 2 stories high and swept the coastline of the small inlet bay that was shaped like a crescent moon. The building itself formed an enormous square and had a huge inner courtyard. Beneath the main building and the courtyard were an endless collection of nooks, storage rooms, and miles of catacombs that boasted an age even older than the above-ground building. While the resort itself was practically a natural wonder, the resort's dock was Adeline's favorite place in the whole area. It was a wall made of rocks the size of a large man's fist, held together with pale cement that matched the light color of the rocks. The wall rose 10 feet above the waterline, but as the land curved around, the man-made wall meshed into the natural landscape. From there, stairs cut into the stone of the earth followed the shape of the inlet down to the water's edge. It was the same on both sides of the long dock, and it allowed boats to load and unload passengers right at the resort's hearth. In addition to that, a natural stone ledge extended out from one of the boat landings. Bleached white by the sun and beaten smooth by the sea, was a perfect spot for sunbathing or swimming. As for the water, it was as blue and sparkled as brilliantly as a priceless sapphire. The water was crystal clear, and the loveliness of it all could mesmerize even the coldest of hearts. The Romano del Mare complemented the land on which it stood. It didn't try to compete with the natural beauty surrounding it. Rather, it did its best not to get in the way. Putting her back to the sea, Adeline took in the large, now empty resort. The client that Nicolo had arranged to meet with today had a reputation for bulldozing and rebuilding. She flinched at the thought of the Romano del Mare razed to the ground, only to have a garish monstrosity built in its place. She'd seen pictures of Nicolo's clients' other constructions. They were more about flash than substance. They didn't understand the Sicilian culture, and anyone who stayed at any resort that they built here would miss out on all that being in Sicily was really about. I can't stay to watch that,
Adeline said to herself. But then she had no intentions of that. She had a plan. The buyer she had set up to view the resort owed her a favor. With his help, Adeline was going to convince Nicolo that he had a buyer willing to commit if some improvements to the property were made. In truth, though, her fake buyer was just that. Fake. The sale would never happen. It was underhanded of her, but she knew that in the end, Nicolo's investment in the property would pay off for him. He would come out financially ahead, and the Romano del Mare would live to see another century. It was a win-win. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Turning her back to the resort once more, she pulled it out of her pocket to check the incoming email she had just received. It was from Andalusia Real Estate, the Spanish real estate agency to which she had applied. Her application had been accepted, and they were returning with an offer of a job. A salary bid was included. It was lower than anticipated, but that was to be expected. She would counterbid, aiming high, and then an agreement would be met somewhere in the middle. She sighed heavily as she accepted that her future was to be in Spain. It was bittersweet, but the thought of new adventures brought a smile to her lips despite her sadness. Typing in some search words, Adeline's phone loaded with images of Spain. It wasn't Sicily, she knew, but it was very charming. On top of that, she would be exposed to new foods, places, and people, in addition to new excitement to satiate her need to do and see more than the everyday life she'd been living. Parasailing in Spain? A warm tenor spoke next to Adeline's ear, causing her to jump and send her cell phone tumbling. Nicolo's quick hand snatched it out of midair before it could fall to the ground. Then he handed it back to her. Turning, she found him smiling lazily back at her, with the gaze of an early morning lover in his dreamy eyes.
I didn't hear you. You scared me,
Adeline said, her voice and body at first stiff with embarrassment at being caught so completely by surprise. Then her shoulders relaxed, and she allowed herself to smile too, with her head tilted slightly back so that she could look up into Nicolo's face. He was standing close to her, as Sicilians often did, and she had to resist the urge to rest her palm on his solid and steady muscular chest. She imagined the feel of his strength beneath her hand, and forced herself to focus instead on the fact that he wanted to tear down a building that had stood for nearly 1,000 years. I am sorry, Nicolo said, leaning in to kiss her right cheek, and then her left. I saw you standing here, looking as lovely as any day I've seen, and I could not resist the chance to look upon you before, how do you say, before your guard was up.
Before my guard was up?
Adeline parroted him, her brows lifted in surprise, and her smile growing. It's not your fault, Beda. You're Americano. It's your way. Adeline gasped, and her cheeks colored as her eyes sparkled with ire.
I am not Americano, she exclaimed, in response to the implication that she was a Sicilian who had lost her roots. Beda, forgive me. Nicolo bent low to kiss her hand. I only meant that you are from America. I can hear it in your voice, no? Adeline gave Nicolo a sideways glance as she considered whether or not to forgive him. After all, she had come home to Sicily, and she had embraced her roots with both arms wide. She was not Americano. She ignored the fact that she was considering abandoning those roots to move to Spain. She had not moved yet. She was still in Sicily, and so for now at least, she was still not Americano. And that Nicolo had called her Beta, beautiful, did help to soothe the fire he sparked within her a little. So she demurred with a Mona Lisa smile. Beta, there you are, Nicolo exclaimed, throwing his arms wide before giving her another two-cheek kiss to greet the return of the happy Adeline. She laughed and batted Nicolo away with the back of her hand. The man was solid. She had not expected the wall of muscle her hand had met. It's not me who is the Americano, Adeline said, giving a slow, flirtatious blink of her eyes to soften her words. She wasn't sure that she could call him Americano. It wasn't that he had given up his roots for the sake of America. It was more that he had simply given up his roots of anywhere, so far as she could tell from what she had learned from others or gleaned from the internet. He was a jet-setter, never staying in one place for very long. He had a wanderlust every bit as bad as she did. Either that, or the idea of anything permanent sent him running. She wasn't sure which. Nicolo slapped his hand over his heart, as if wounded by Adeline's words, and then said, lifting a hand into the sky, I am a child of the world. For that, you will have to blame my mother. But enough of that. I want to know why you are looking at the waters of Spain when you have the wonderful Ionian Sea at your fingertips. Adeline waffled on whether or not to tell him the truth, that she had been offered a position in Spain. She was still holding out hope that he would be willing to renovate the Romano del Mare rather than sell it for demolition. If he thought that she would not be there to help implement renovation plans, he might more easily turn around and walk away from one of the most fantastic resorts the island had ever known. The place just needed some TLC, some love to rejuvenate it. She couldn't turn her back on it now that she had finally, after so many months of trying, gotten the attention of one of the resort's new owners. I was considering a vacation, Adeline answered, adding a little adventure to my life. Nicolo's entire face registered surprise as his eyes went around and his full lips parted. Do you live here? He said, with a wide sweep of his arm. And you want to go to Spain for adventure? Adeline shrugged, unapologetic. I've seen all of the major spots at least 3 times. I've been to Mount Etna, the Valley of the Temples, and Palermo Cathedral. I've taken 5 different tours covering the Greek, Roman, and Spanish histories of the island, just to name a few. I don't know how much more there is for me to see. Oh, it's so cute that you think that, he said with a crooked smile and devilish eyes. He moved close, turning her face to the sea, and draped a strong arm over her shoulder. She fit perfectly against him. Stretching an arm out before her, he pointed at the horizon in a sweeping motion. Have you heard of Taormina's Grata Azzurra? Winding tunnels into solid rock with water so blue, it will make you weep tears of joy. He moved his outstretched hand, as if he could paint the images of his words, mesmerizing Adeline. His voice was a seduction in her ear, and she found herself leaning into him more. Shaking her head no, she didn't speak the word for fear that it would break the spell he was weaving. Tipping his head, Nicolo whispered, and it gave her goosebumps. Then there is Dead Man's Waves and Mermaid's Retreat. Mermaid's Retreat? She gave his side a playful nudge with her elbow. Now you're making stuff up. Don't tease me. The sound of a car entering the parking lot reached Adeline's ears, and she tucked her phone away inside her pants pocket. As easy as breathing, she shifted from play into work mode. That is, until she felt Nicolo's large hand settle over the small of her back. It made her shiver and her breath hitch. When he spoke again, his voice had deepened and it vibrated over her. It made her have to bite her bottom lip to keep from releasing a sighed whimper of want. Better, let me show you Sicily. Its beauty goes deep, and you need an experienced guide to help you find all the pleasures it has to offer. Adeline's cheeks turned pink at his choice of words, but when she twisted to look him in the eyes, all that was within their stunning blue depths was sincerity. She risked one word, and one word only. To say more would give away how much his touch and his presence affected her, and she wasn't ready for that. She also wasn't ready to give up on living life to its fullest. Her grandparents had lived with a motto of embracing life and all it had to offer. She would too. Yes, she breathed on an exhale. It turned out that even that one word revealed more than she had wanted, and the heat in her cheeks grew as she faced forward once more. But her heart and her body sang with the word and the possibilities before her. Yes. 5. Nicolo. Nicolo saw the interest fade from the eyes of Adeline's client the minute he got out of his car and took in the state of the crumbling dock. It was humbling to see it anew through a stranger's eyes, but it was what it was, and the state of the resort was why he and his brothers wanted to sell the Romano del Mare. The sooner the resort sold, the sooner Nicolo could leave Sicily behind and return to his jet-setting lifestyle. He didn't like to be tied down. "Nicolo, please meet Giro di Salvo," Adeline said. If she, too, had noticed the instant lack of interest in Giro's eyes, she didn't let any disappointment enter her voice. Nicolo shook Giro's hand. "Thank you for coming today. As you know, this property has a rich history, but it is ready to see a new chapter in its existence," Nicolo said, starting in on his sales pitch. But 5 minutes later, the spark of interest in Giro's eyes still hadn't returned. And Nicolo was surprised that the man didn't make some excuse for why he needed to leave the meeting early. Instead, the three of them spent the next 2 hours walking the hotel from top to bottom, and even taking a look at the land from the roof of the hotel. The only parts that weren't completely explored were the catacombs and many of the small storage rooms below. When the tour was done and Giro headed on his way, the goodbyes weren't full of warmth. Instead, they were perfunctory, and Gio was in his car driving away a moment later. "Well, we won't be hearing from him again," Nicolo said. "I am sorry, Adeline, but your client doesn't seem to have much interest in this place. He couldn't see the vision of what it could be. But the client I've set up will be able to see it." He gave her his best eat-your-heart-out wink. "Is your client early?" Adeline asked, pulling out her phone to glance at the time as a red Porsche pulled into the parking lot. "Looks that way. Perfect timing," Nicolo said, before shifting into introductions when a middle-aged man exited the Porsche. He was tall and slender, with pale skin and angular features. Nicolo was sure that Adeline would be able to recognize that the man was a native to the island. "Please meet Adeline Peluso. Adeline, this is Thomas Novotny." Adeline shook his hand, instead of leaning in for the customary cheek kisses of the island. "Thomas and I have been talking about the possibilities of this property for the last month." And so another tour began. Nicolo walked them from one end of the long deck to the other, pointing out how spots of it were crumbling. Then inside the hotel, he showed off every frayed wire and cracked wall. The damage was extensive. It was like exposing the faults and weaknesses of an old friend, but there was no helping it. The Romano del Mare had been part of his family for long enough. It was time to let it go to someone who could bring a fresh start to the location. "What are your plans with the place?" Adeline asked Thomas, as Nicolo wiggled a wrought iron railing that had grown loose in its mooring. The plaster had given way, and now the railing posed a risk of being toppled over if someone were to lean against it too heavily. "Romano del Mare was a fine resort in its day," Thomas said. "I've seen the pictures, but it's not what today's tourist is looking for. We would gut the interior first and salvage the materials we could. This iron railing is exquisite, for example. We might not use it at this facility, but it could be incorporated into another project." He shrugged,
did a head tilt to the side and pull the ends of his mouth down as his gaze swept the space around them. All of this, the building, everything, we would bulldoze it to the ground and start fresh. Adeline flinched at the description of what would happen to the Romano del Mare, but Thomas didn't notice. In its place, we would build a state-of-the-art steel and glass resort. This time, it was Nicolo's turn to do his best to hold back his reaction. The material of the island was rock. It was in every piece of architecture on Sicily. We will ship in our own staff and chefs, Thomas continued, oblivious. It will be offered up as a home away from home for the European traveler. And will have nothing to do with Sicily. Nicolo had to bite his tongue. There weren't that many builders who could afford their asking price of 20 million euros. If Thomas purchased the Romano del Mare for that price, it would be his to do with as he pleased, even if that meant destroying it and building a monstrosity in its place. In many ways, seeing the Romano del Mare torn down rather than restored would be easier. To see it restored would be to see someone else succeed where his family had failed. Yet hearing Thomas's plans for the location left him feeling queasy. "Those plans are amazing," Adeline said, with so much excitement that Nicolo focused the whole of his attention on her in an attempt to discover whether there was anything disingenuous about her response. To his surprise, she appeared thrilled. Then concern etched her face as the line between her brows showed itself. "Of course," she hesitated, pursing her lips as if working through a difficult problem. "Sicily's historic preservation societies could make getting approval for such a design very difficult." Ah, there she is. Nicolo had to hide his smile. He didn't want Adeline to know that he was amused rather than upset by her attempt to undermine the sale. He liked seeing the fire in her, and it had saddened him to think, even for that split second, that her fight had gone. "Sicily's Historic Preservation Society?" Thomas repeated. It was clear that this was the first he was hearing of its existence. "Oh, yes, Adeline said. "Sicily has a very rich history, and more than anywhere, that history can be seen in its architecture. So, the Historic Preservation Society is very vocal when it comes to the kind of buildings that get built here on the island." Nicolo pursed his lips but didn't respond, leading the three of them into a suite of rooms. The rooms had been used for all kinds of celebrations, everything from weddings and anniversaries to important family meetings when a neutral space was needed. In this case, family spelled another way was mafia. In Sicily, they were simply a part of life. The windows in the suite and throughout Romano del Mare were very tall with a rounded top. They were shaped similar and about the same size as a human body. Every window throughout the suite of rooms was cracked. Yet regardless of their age and the beating that time had given them, the view they provided was spectacular. Nicolo wondered about what kind of view a wall of glass would provide. It would indeed be spectacular, but something would be lost without the stable strength of the building to frame the sight of the rolling land and sea beyond. "This is better," he thought to himself, aware of a sadness that the view he knew so well would soon be lost to be replaced by another. While the History Preservation Society had a lot of pull, he also knew that Thomas's company had enough money to grease the right palms in order to turn arguments toward their cause rather than against it. "Look here," Nicolo said, returning to the task at hand. He dragged a finger down a thin line in the plaster that looked as if it was nothing but a crack that a little paint could fix. "This crack extends all the way down this wall, all the way down the wall of the floor below us and into the foundation of the building. It doesn't get much bigger than what you see here, but the foundation has been compromised." Thomas clapped his hands together. "You see, with issues like this, there can be no reasonable objection to this old place being torn down." Adeline traced her finger down the crack all the way to the floor. "I had noticed this before," she said, then lifted her face to look at Nicolo. "Are you sure that it extends all the way down to the foundation?" "I'm positive." Adeline said, standing up and crossing her arms over her chest. She did not look impressed by the severity of the crack or by its inferred meaning. Thomas prompted, his curiosity piqued.
If buildings with issues like these were destroyed, I imagine half of the buildings on the island would have been torn down by now. While you could use it to make an argument for the building's destruction, Sicily's legal system is very thorough. They would need to review the building's longevity potential before making any final decisions. Thomas looked at Nicolo before turning his attention back to Adeline. And how long do these reviews take? Oh, never more than 8 years, Adeline answered brightly for him. Nicolo threw his arms down at his side in exasperation. Only in the rarest of cases does it take 8 years, he quickly reassured Thomas. And in cases that are not rare? Asked Thomas. How long do they take? A couple of months? He leaned into the question a little and sounded hopeful. Oh, no, Adeline exclaimed. A couple of months' deliberation would be as rare as 8 years. On average, she pursed her lips and bobbed her head from side to side as if calculating. I'd say a 2 or 3 review in cases such as this would be most common. Thomas looked instantly crestfallen. Sicily is the gem of the Ionian Sea, Nicolo said quickly, shifting back into cellar mode. People from all over Europe and the rest of the world come here to see the beauty and wonder that this island and the Sicilian people have to offer. Yes, they do, Adeline chimed in enthusiastically. They want to immerse themselves in the old-world charm of the island, the traditions passed down from one generation to the next. They come in order to experience new adventures, or reconnect with the heritage of their roots. Nicolo knew that Thomas's vision for the land on which the Romano del Mare currently stood did not fit in with the tourist pitch that Adeline was selling. The doubt in Thomas's eyes told him that Thomas had recognized the disparity too. Thomas, Nicolo said, putting a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Your company is known the world over within business circles for its accurate projection of earnings. Thomas nodded. And what did that projection say about building your resort, your way, right here? Thomas's slow-growing smile soon filled his features with an arrogant satisfaction that came from having been right more times than wrong. The projection said that we would be turning a profit within 3 years. 3 years. It was Nicolo's turn to be stunned. That fast? Thomas nodded, his smile growing ever bigger. You are right, Nicolo. Sicily is the gem of the Ionian Sea, and it's a gem we are eager to make our own. Then he turned to Adeline. That is, of course, if we can navigate the waters of the local government to get the approvals we'll need. Money that is tied up in a non-functioning resort isn't earning for us. We don't want that. It was another half an hour before Nicolo stood once more on the crumbling dock with Adeline at his side. Together they watched Thomas's little red Porsche disappear from view. I think he's going to put in an offer, Adeline said, concern in her voice. I'm not so sure he will, Nicolo said with equal concern. Then, turning to face her, his voice deepened and his eyes narrowed. In all likelihood, she had just cost his family millions. Adeline Peluso, you are a worthy adversary. His mouth quirked up at the corner as he took her hand, lifted, and kissed it. His lips lingered against her soft flesh, and his intense gaze never wavered from her eyes. I look forward to the day when we can fight on the same side. 6. Adeline. Are you sure that we're going to need all of this? Adeline asked, as she staggered under the weight of a whole host of items picked out by her best friend, Ilana. You want the rooms to turn out perfect, don't you? Ilana goaded. Ilana let her own armfuls fall into a heap on the floor. Oh, Adeline, the pictures didn't do this place justice. This is gorgeous. She turned an assessing eye on Adeline, and then smiled mischievously. Tell me again why you chose this suite to do a design mock-up? This is the honeymoon suite, right? It didn't have anything to do with that hot Sicilian you were telling me about, did it? She teased. Adeline tried to ignore the heat that she knew flushed her cheeks pink. It wasn't because of the march up the stairs under her heavy load. It was because of the insinuation that she might have an ulterior motive besides trying to save the Romano del Mare. Which, if she were being honest with herself, was true. She did have an ulterior motive. Her heart quickened, and her mind raced every time Nicolo was near. Being around him made her feel alive, more alive than she had in years. One moment, he'd make her so mad that she wanted to cuss at him, and the next, she'd want to throw herself into his arms. She hadn't been so excited about anyone in years, but there was no way she was going to admit any of that to Ilana, not yet anyway. Her attraction to Nicolo was just fun and temporary, nothing more. He'd be gone next month or next week, or she would be in Spain. They had no future, and that was for the best. They didn't want the same things. He wanted to always be leaving wherever he was, and she wanted to have a home to come back to after her adventures. He wanted to throw away his heritage, and she wanted to preserve hers. They were too opposite. Ilana, you are the best designer I know, and these are among the most beautiful rooms in the hotel. But they are also the honeymoon suite, has no bearing at all. She said the words, yet she couldn't quite convince herself. She glanced over her shoulder to see if Ilana was believing them, but Ilana's attention had become overwhelmed by the space itself. Adeline, this is going to look so good when we're done. These ceilings. She traced the line of the cathedral's ceiling by extending an arm and moving her finger through the air. Are 20 feet high. She shook her head. They can't tear this place down. It's too magnificent. So where do we start? Put me to work. Adeline watched as Ilana walked a circle around the room, opened a door that led to a veranda, and then moved through to examine a sitting room and the bathroom. Running water reached Adeline's ears next. When Ilana reappeared, she was nodding her head approvingly. This I can work with. She slapped her hands together. First, we clean. The next hour was spent sweeping, wiping down walls, cleaning the bathroom, and pruning the vining flowers on the veranda. We are going to need more things, Ilana declared, and pulled out her cell phone. Feliz, she spoke into it. I need a favor. She then proceeded to give him a list which included fresh flowers, an assortment of foods, a small round table, a tall ladder, fresh towels, and a variety of other items. She pulled the phone away from her face and covered the bottom half with her hand. When do you plan to show your man the space? He's not my man. I wouldn't have him, she said with a wink before answering Ilana's question. Tonight. Twinkle lights, Ilana said, speaking into the phone again. Bring. She paused as her eyes scanned the room. 8 strands. No, make that 12. Her attention shifted to the open door leading out to the veranda. She ended the call just as decisively as she'd started it, tapping the call's end button. Thank you for doing this for me, Adeline said, as she gathered debris into a trash bag. Pfft, Ilana said, flipping the back of her hand through the air to dismiss Adeline's thanks as she walked over to the bed. This is what we do. We take care of each other. She sat down on the mattress and then bounced up and down. Her long black hair was woven into a braid that fell over her shoulder, and it bounced up and down with her. The mattress is good. The bed is stable. Ilana, Adeline objected, in a laughing sing-song voice. We want the rooms to be as functional as possible, yes? Now, we know the bed works. Those were Ilana's words, but she gave Adeline a big, slow wink, as if to say something else. Adeline laughed. You're terrible. You're the one making up your bedroom to impress a boy, Ilana teased, as she ran her hand over the bed's cream-colored coverlet. Tell me more about him. You know that I'm doing this for the hotel and not for Nicolo, Adeline insisted, but then she relented. She made her way across the room and sat down next to Ilana. Then, as one, they both flopped backward so they could stare up at the arching ceiling. He's so handsome, Adeline began. He makes my toes tingle when he kisses my hand. Ilana rolled onto her side so that she faced Adeline. That is a good sign. If he can make you tingle just by kissing your hand, think of where else he can make you tingle. Adeline remained on her back, but turned her head so that she could see Ilana. Then she, too, twisted so that she laid on her side. He's a good man, I can see it, but he also seems to be a little lost. It's like he's a man and a little boy all at the same time. He makes me think of a child who's lost his way from home so long ago that he's stopped trying to find it. It makes me sad. Ilana murmured. But does he make your heart happy?
Adeline's smile was small and tentative, the same as her feelings for Nicolo.
I think so. I mean, we haven't spent very much time together, but everything about him feels right. When he's near, I feel like anything is possible. I feel like I'm on the best adventure of my life.
Could it be? Ilana asked, reaching out a finger to tickle Adeline's middle.
Could you have found love?
Adeline snorted.
No, no.
She paused as she reflected.
Lust, maybe. But love?
She shrugged.
It's too soon. Besides, I'm leaving for Spain. I don't believe it. You wouldn't leave me. I know you wouldn't.
Adeline sighed heavily.
It's true. I don't want to. I'd rather stay. But if they tear this place down, it'll break my heart. I can't be here and watch that happen.
Ilana nodded sagely.
Then I'll visit you in Spain.
You'll come live with me in Spain, Adeline corrected.
And run away from Sicily? Ha! Never. My Nana would come after me and drag me home by my ear, she laughed. No, no. Sicily is my home. It's where I'll live, and it's where I will someday die. I don't want to grow old anywhere else.
The clamor of noise and swearing reached their ears from outside the room. A moment later, Felice appeared, loaded down with goods. Strands of twinkle lights adorned his arm all the way up to his shoulder on one side, and an enormous ladder was tucked under his other. A bag of fresh flowers hung from a belt looped around his neck. An enormous and tightly stuffed backpack sat on his back, and he was pushing a small round table forward with his foot.
I'm here,
he announced, unnecessarily, looking more than a little proud with himself. Ilana sat up and then smiled brightly at Adeline.
Maybe you aren't in love with him, but after he sees these rooms tonight, he's going to fall madly in love with you. He'll be helpless to do otherwise.
Oh, hush, Adeline said, but couldn't stop her grin. The thought of Nicolo falling head over heels in love with her was exciting, even if it was ridiculous. But it was also a complication she didn't need or want.
It has already happened. He is in love with you, and all that is left is for him to realize it.
Turning to Felice, she clapped her hands.
Bring those things over here. We have so much work to do.
Then to Adeline, she barked,
You, go. Get cleaned up and rest. You have a man's heart to tame tonight. You'll need your strength.
And with that, she gave Adeline another big, slow wink.
What have I gotten myself into?
Adeline wondered, as Ilana shooed her to the door. She gave one last glance at the room behind her, and guilt niggled at her conscience. What she'd done, and planned to do, with the fake buyer wasn't nice. But tonight, she would try to make Nicolo see what it was that she saw when she looked at the Romano del Mare. Ilana was right. She was trying to get Nicolo to fall in love, but not with her. She wanted him to fall in love with what this place could be again. She wanted the Romano del Mare to be the sparkle on the Ionian Sea's gem. 7. Nicolo.
Adeline, where are you?
Nicolo called as he made his way up the long, curving stairs to the Romano del Mare's second floor. Adeline had sent him a text message to meet her there, but she had refused to tell him why. He didn't know what she had planned, but the beautiful woman threatening to steer his desires to her whims needed to learn how to let things go. Soon enough, the Romano del Mare would be nothing more than piles of rubble. He would make her see that, and accept it. Outside, the sky had already turned to dark and had given way to stars. Nicolo didn't like the thought of Adeline being in the abandoned resort alone at night. While the building's power had been turned back on to accommodate the inspectors various buyers would undoubtedly hire, many of the light fixtures had burned out or had simply stopped working due to issues that had developed in the wiring over time. So as he made his way through the building, the rooms and corridors were more full of shadows than they were of light. Reaching the stairs' top landing, he turned to make his way down a long hallway. She had said to meet her on the top floor, but hadn't said where. Then he spotted a glow emanating from the open door of one of the rooms, covering that portion of the hallway in a soft glow.
Adeline,
he called, starting to wonder if he was about to meet a ghost from his past. Possibly his nana or nano had come to tell him how disappointed they were in his eager willingness to sell his birthright. Nicolo's steps paused, and he took a deep breath. His grandparents had worked all their lives to make the Romano del Mare a place that instilled joy in all those who visited. To this day, generations of families spoke of the resort, and his grandparents, with great affection. As long as his grandparents had been at the helm, the resort had thrived. It wasn't until they stepped aside that it started going downhill. That had been when Nicolo was around 14 years old. He hadn't known about the mismanagement that had followed his grandparents' retirement, but even if he had, he wouldn't have been equipped with the tools he'd have needed to save the resort. Within a year of his grandparents stepping aside, the Romano del Mare stopped resembling the charming resort everyone wanted to visit. In 4 more years, the resort had closed its doors. It was not until their grandparents had passed away last year that Nicolo and his brothers realized the incredible fines that had been lodged against the property. In just over a decade, those fines had doubled and quadrupled until they equaled nearly 18 million euro. It was a weight under which the building itself seemed to be crumbling. The cracks in the plaster walls and concrete foundation were a testament to its tired existence. Nicolo didn't want to see the Romano del Mare demolished, but it needed to be demolished. A shadow moved through the cascading light, pulling into the corridors. Someone in the room shifted. Nicolo quickened his step. He still had not heard Adeline's voice, and worry gripped him now. He didn't know of any connections that the mafia had to the Romano del Mare, but with the hefty fines laid against it, anything was possible. Who knew whose pockets the payment of those fines would fill? If someone has put hands on Adeline, if someone has hurt her. Nicolo couldn't finish the thought, and it was with a startling realization that he recognized that she meant more to him than he had known. Focused on reaching her as fast as he could, he broke into a run, only to freeze when he rounded the corner into the room where the soft light glowed. "Adeline?" he whispered. Standing before him in a gently flowing, baby blue handkerchief dress with spaghetti straps and black, high-heeled Mary Jane shoes was Adeline. An angelic choir's worth of candles lit the room in a light that coalesced around her. She glowed. "Adeline?" Nicolo whispered again, stepping deeper into the room. A room that was magnificent. The bed was covered with a crushed red velvet cover and topped with shiny white satin pillows. The soft scent of honeysuckle and ginger reached him next. It was the distinct smell of the plumeria flowers that grew wild around the resort. No other plumeria on the island had that same scent. "Adeline, what have you done?" Adeline shifted her weight nervously from one foot to the other before crossing her legs at her ankles and clasping her hands before her. "She is so beautiful." Nicolo hungered to take her in his arms and make her his, even if only for a night. But he didn't move toward her. She had worked magic in a place that everyone else had given up on. He would let her have her say. He wouldn't tell her beforehand that her efforts were for nothing. He wouldn't say that his mind could not be changed from giving up on his family's legacy. No, he wouldn't say anything. This was her moment. "This is the Romano del Mare," Adeline said, opening her arms wide to take in the room. Nicolo could see the cracks in the plaster behind the dreamy candlelight, but instead of showing itself as a fault, it added to the room's charm. Despite that, Nicolo wanted to interrupt Adeline. He wanted to tell her that this had been the Romano del Mare, but it was not that place any longer. Those days had gone. "I came here as a little girl with my grandparents," Adeline continued. "They taught me about life and love, and every time I thought about coming home to Sicily, my memory of this place was at the heart of it. The Romano del Mare can be fixed. She's worth it. She's got good bones, strong bones. The crack you pointed out yesterday to the buyer, it's nothing. I checked with an inspector. He said that the Romano del Mare still has years and years of life in her. She's a good place." Adeline put her hand over her heart.
It's where I saw my grandparents at their happiest. They loved each other all their lives, but there was an extra spark of joy in them when they were here.
Nicolo wanted to counter her. He wanted to say that the extra spark of joy that she had seen in them was from them having her near. But he held his tongue.
But that's only one story,
Adeline spoke on.
Countless people have come here to fall in love, sometimes with each other all over again. When we go into town, people would learn that we were staying here and their faces would light up with delight. The town loves this place. It provided good jobs. Not just jobs. It gave people a way to provide for their families. Jobs aren't always easy to come by on the island, but the tourism that the Romano del Mare brought into the region kept the whole area afloat. Since the Romano del Mare closed its doors, the entire region has suffered.
A small knife twisted in Nicolo's gut at the confirmation that the resort's closing had hurt the surrounding towns.
If someone like Thomas builds here, they would try to encapsulate the experience of the tourists. They will try to keep those tourists here and keep all of their money here too. They won't share with the community. On top of that, they'll ship most of their products in from the mainland. I researched them. They won't even offer good jobs to the region. For any position above menial labor, they ship the staff in. So not even the jobs will go to the people who live here.
That's not good, he thought, and he meant it. It wasn't good at all. Sicily was full of talented, hard-working people. They deserved better than to be shoved aside as someone took from them and gave nothing back. It wasn't good business, let alone not being good for Sicily. It was not how he designed development properties, and he could not advocate such a practice being used here. Yet, he didn't want the Romano del Mare. His family was done with it, and he did not want to make it his life's work as his grandparents had done. Life had more to offer him, and he was going to take it. Adeline took a step forward.
But if you fix the Romano del Mare before you sell her, if you make improvements, there's a chance that whatever buyer you sell her to will keep her intact. They might not tear her to the ground. She could still stand, and she could still be a boon to the community.
Improvements. The hotel had nearly 18 million euros of fines against her, yet Adeline wanted his family to pour more money into her. The thought didn't sit easily, but neither did the thought of turning his back on a community that had depended on the Romano del Mare for generations. Why didn't I see it before? He wondered. Because you haven't been here long enough to see the truth, the other half of his brain answered for him. Adeline took another step forward.
I've run the numbers. I've spoken with the inspector and several contractors. If you make improvements and fixes to the Romano del Mare, she could be worth millions of euros more when it comes time to sell.
Nicolo blinked as her words sank in. He took a step forward. So the money invested in it would be multiplied. The Romano del Mare would more likely be purchased by a renovator instead of a bulldoze and build company. And the entire region would benefit?
Yes,
Adeline said, lifting her fingers to her lips. She looked as though she was ready to jump up and down like a little girl from excitement. So investing more was a win in every way. If she's right. But Nicolo ignored the voice of warning. Right now, he didn't care if she was wrong. He chose to believe in the world as she saw it. He chose to believe in the possibilities. His head started nodding before he said the word. Then, when he did say it, his voice filled the room. Yes.
Yes?
He smiled big, feeling like a better man than he had ever been. He definitely had a lighter heart. Yes. Adeline squealed with delight and ran to Nicolo. Jumping just before she reached him, she flew into his arms, and it was the most natural thing in the world for him to close his arms around her. There, tight against his body, he held her lifted off the ground so that her face was even with his. He had never seen a creature so beautiful in all his life. Then, when she put her hands on his face, she leaned in to kiss him. The world faded away, so that all that was left was her. Adeline, he whispered against her lips. Softening his grip on her, he allowed her to slip through his arms until she stood on the ground. It was then his turn to take her face in his hands and lean down to kiss her lips.
Maybe this is a good time to ask how single you are, Adeline said. Her lips were like the brush of a flower's petal as they moved over his. Nicolo pulled his head back to look at her. He studied her face for signs of what she might be feeling. You don't want to be the other woman? Adeline's arms pushed against his chest with surprising strength as an instant answer to his question. Shh, Beda, he chuckled. Her body softened against his, though he was not foolish enough to think that her concerns were soothed. Leaning down, he dragged his lips over her cheek to her ear. I have no one and nothing but this moment here with you. There is no woman who has claim to my bed, but I will give it to you if you want it. Her small frame shivered against him, and it brought a growl from somewhere deep in his chest. Please say you want it. She moved against him, but he pulled away so that he could see her face. Looking up at him with eyes overheating with desire, she nodded and said, Yes, I want your bed to be mine. Nicolo hoped that Adeline knew what she was saying. He wasn't asking for a one-night stand. He wasn't asking for a fling. He wanted to know her. He wanted her in his life. For once, he wanted to belong to someone, at least for a little while. Cupping the back of her head with his hand, he bent to take her lips with his. He was gentle at first, but as her fists twisted into the fabric of his shirt, his kiss grew harder and more demanding. In the next moment, she was climbing him and wrapping her legs around his waist. She was taking control, insatiable, determined. Walking blindly, he carried her to the bed. There, with his hands on her waist, he lifted her body off his body and tossed her onto the bed. When he stepped away, putting distance between him and the bed, she got onto her knees and looked as though she would leap off and tackle him. He considered letting her. Her eagerness turned him on like nothing ever had before, and every noise of delight and desire that she'd made had his whole body straining toward her. But he held himself back. This was their first time together, and he wanted to make it last. Beda, will I survive this night with you? He asked, as he pulled his button-up shirt from his pants. He unbuttoned it at his wrists before going to work on the buttons below his neck. Rip it off, Adeline demanded. No, you do not mess with a Sicilian man's clothes. I would have thought you knew this, he teased. It wasn't true, at least not for him. He would rip his shirt off in a heartbeat to please her, but he needed to take his time. He wanted to savor her. It was Adeline's turn to growl, but her growl turned into a purr when Nicolo finally stripped away his shirt to expose what lay beneath. Oh my God! Where'd you get those abs? She whispered. He watched as her eyes raked his body from head to toe and back up again.
Sorry, readers. Here's where we fade to black due to YouTube explicit content guidelines. If you dream for the steam, you'll need to take a look in the book.
It was sleep that claimed them next as they lay wrapped in a tangle of each other's arms. Dreams came to Nicolo as he slept. Dreams of a white picket fence, a smiling Adeline, her hand on her round, swollen belly, and laughing children running through the yard. The images were not the stuff of nightmares as Nicolo had thought they would be. Instead, at least within his dreams, they were his heart's greatest desire and most fervent wish. 8. Adeline. With her eyes still closed and her head resting on Nicolo's shoulder, Adeline felt him lightly stroke her arm with the tips of his fingers. Her body hummed in satisfaction from the things that Nicolo had done to her the night before. Now, the morning birds were singing, and her heart was light. Too light. She knew that Nicolo was not the committing kind. At almost 30, a man as startling handsome, charming, and rich as he was didn't stay single on accident. He didn't want to be tied down. Without moving, Adeline opened her eyes and peered up at Nicolo, stifling a sigh at his unshaven beard and the strong line of his jaw. His beautiful mouth was tight, though, and his eyes were crinkled at the corner as his gaze roamed the room in the morning light. That's when Adeline realized that his muscles were tense instead of relaxed. She'd slept like a baby in his arms, but upon waking, he was steeped in worry and stress. Adeline shifted her own gaze to look around the room without moving her head, so as not to alert Nicolo that she was awake. And she saw what it was that he was seeing. Even though the morning light was soft and forgiving, the cracks in the plaster and the damage sustained by abandonment and neglect stood out as if a spotlight were being shone upon them.
He's thinking about backing out.
Adeline's heart sank. She'd been so close to saving the Romano del Mare. She wouldn't give up. She couldn't give up. Nicolo was still with her, and she still had his attention. That meant there was still a chance, albeit a small one, that she could save the place that she loved most in the world.
"Good morning,"
Nicolo said, his warm tenor pulling her out of her thoughts. She shot him a sheepish grin.
"Good morning."
He turned on his side and covered her with his head and shoulders before giving her a slow kiss that left her wanting so much more. Moving down her body, he nuzzled her neck with his soft lips as his whiskers gently scratched her skin. Her mind flashed to lazy mornings with them eating breakfast, reading the paper, and simply enjoying each other's company. But she squashed the image fast and hard. Nicolo wasn't hers to keep. He was on loan from the world, and that was all.
"How did you sleep, ti amo?"
Adeline's heart swelled at Nicolo's use of my love in reference to her. She knew that he didn't mean it literally, that it was only a term of endearment, but it made her happy to hear it spoken by his sweet lips all the same.
"Like an angel,"
she answered with a shy smile. My angel. He stroked her hair from her forehead, and his brilliantly blue eyes seemed to make love to her as his gaze caressed her face. Bashful heat filled Adeline's cheeks. Then she shifted her attention away from him as a sense of gloom filled her. This might be her last truly wonderful time spent at the Romano del Mare. That knowledge was made all the more bittersweet because of the fleeting nature of her relationship with the person who had made that time so wonderful. When the resort was gone, she wouldn't even have him to share her memories with. "Tell me," Nicolo bid her. Steeling her heart for what she must say, Adeline looked at Nicolo and shrugged one shoulder. It was a simple movement, but it felt like such a lie. It was as if she wanted to believe that what she was about to say meant nothing, even though it made her chest hurt.
"Last night, we were in a moment."
She shrugged her shoulder again.
"I just want you to know that I don't expect anything of you. I mean, I know that, well, last night doesn't make us a couple."
Her gaze drifted away from his once more, and her smile faltered.
"Te amo, what must you think of me?"
Nicolo said, his voice gently chiding. "I'm not going to call you my angel one minute and my acquaintance the next. You're the joy of my heart, and I would be a broken man if all you wanted from me was friendship." Italian men were the most romantic men in the world, she knew. So, while Nicolo's words warmed her heart, she still held back from believing that he could truly want something more from her besides casual. Nicolo's eyes went wide as he pushed himself up and away from her to the full distance that his muscled, sculpted arms would allow.
"Or is it you who's trying to let me down easy?
Adeline, is it only friendship that you want from me?"
No, I do want you,"
Adeline quickly reassured.
"I just didn't want you to feel trapped. Last night everything happened so fast."
He lowered his body down on top of hers once more, his expression shifting into that of a wanting lover. "I was hoping that some fast, or not so fast, things could happen this morning." He smiled devilishly as he dragged the tips of his fingers down the slope and curve of her side, tickling her with his light touch. Adeline wiggled and giggled beneath him until it seemed that Nicolo could take it no more. Sliding his hand under her hips and positioning himself more fully on top of her, he coaxed her lips into an impassioned kiss that rivaled their affections of the night before. Suddenly, though, he broke their kiss and lifted himself on his long arms again. "I'm taking a bath," he declared, "and you're taking one with me." His piercing gaze was wicked.
What?
Adeline exclaimed, not sure she could trust her ears. Nicolo pushed himself up to a standing position that straddled Adeline, and the bed covers cascaded off his back, leaving him gloriously available for her viewing. His body was perfection, with his thickly muscled thighs and broad, powerful chest. In the next moment, Nicolo bent over, and Adeline found herself being lifted into the air and thrown over his shoulder as easily as if she weighed nothing. Squealing and laughing, Adeline kicked her feet and slapped her hand on Nicolo's bare bottom, but he just gave hers a slap in return before hopping off the bed and heading toward the tub. A second later, his voice rang from the bathroom. "Oh my God, it's so cold!" Adeline's joyous laughter filled the air. "The heater's out, silly!" It was a long morning of kisses and making love before Adeline and Nicolo made their way out into the world. When they drove his rented BMW into the nearby town, it was still early enough that ordering a cappuccino was permissible, and Nicolo treated them both to the morning coffee plus pastries. With Nicolo's arm draped low across Adeline's back and his hand resting on her hip, she really did feel like they were a couple as they lazily walked the cobbled streets, enjoying the sights and each other's company. A group of old men sat near a doorway, talking about family, fishing, and the weather, while not far away a group of old women collected on a stone bench, bent forward, and focused on an open laptop sitting on the knees of one of the women. Adeline smiled at the sight of them.
"The world is moving forward."
"It is," Nicolo said. "Even here, life changes." Adeline recognized the shift in conversation. They were no longer talking about the little town that they were walking through, or the morning that they'd spent together. They were talking about the future of the Romano del Mare.
"It does change, but traditions endure."
She countered Nicolo's observation.
"There is the tradition of family, and the skilled crafts that are passed down from one generation to the next."
She pointed to a church that was at least 500 years old.
"And there's the tradition of the island's architecture."
Yes, and it is good," Nicolo said. "But then there are the little shops, the bakeries and the restaurants, the places that serve the people with the tools that are available today. They did not have steamed milk for coffee 200 years ago, but now they do. And they have the tools and the buildings that allow for those innovations." Adeline walked on in silence next to him, aware of how little sway she had over the man who held the future of her childhood dreams in his hands. It made her feel helpless, and she didn't like feeling helpless. She knew that she shouldn't have deceived him with a fake buyer to press his hand into making a decision he wasn't ready to make. But she hadn't been able to face standing by and doing nothing. It wasn't her way. When she saw a problem, she did whatever was necessary to solve that problem. The Romano brothers' callous decision to allow the Romano del Mare to be destroyed was a problem she could not turn away from. She would fight to save it any way she could. Next to her, Nicolo sighed. "I will do what I can, and as much as I can," he whispered. "But I don't see another way than to allow the Romano del Mare's time to end. I am sorry, ti amo." Nicolo's morning with Adeline ended on a somber note when he drove her back to the Romano del Mare and watched her drive away in her car. A piece of himself went with her. Standing outside the Romano del Mare, he studied it. From outside and at a distance, the resort still looked strong and sturdy. She had stood against sea storms and had weathered the tread of thousands upon thousands of feet. Yet she looked tired now. Her windows were cracked. Those that were broken out had ugly plastic taped up in their place. The light pink of the plaster had faded over time and now looked an uninviting beige. Weeds had taken over planted flowers, and the dock was crumbling. Inside the old building, he knew that things were not any better. The wiring was frayed in places and was now a fire hazard. Sections of floor had rotted and needed to be replaced, not to mention the multitude of broken tiles. The soldering of the original pipes had used lead, and the entire plumbing system needed to be updated. The boiler no longer worked and had to be replaced. The list of updates went on, and even the basic repairs would tally into the hundreds of thousands, if not more. He shook his head. The first good thing I've had in my life in a long time, and I'm going to lose her over a building. His thumb rubbed the smooth face of his cell phone where it was tucked away in his pants pocket. The temptation to call his brothers to tell them that the plan had changed, that they would be restoring the Romano del Mare instead of selling her, balanced on the tip of his awareness. Yet in the end, he turned his back and walked to his car. He hadn't built his fortune by letting his heart rule his head. He wished things could work out, that he could keep Adeline and the resort and his successful jet-setting lifestyle. But it just wasn't possible. He took his time driving the winding road back to the Verdura resort and allowed his dour thoughts to chase themselves round and round within his head. Then, when he was finally back in his room, he sat down at the small table on his veranda and once more opened the little memory box that held the knickknacks of his past. He stared at a picture of a boy that he believed to be himself, splashing water on a little girl. He smiled, wondering if there was any chance that that little girl had been Adeline. Maybe they were destined to meet, and it was the Romano del Mare's job to bring them together. "And maybe I'm losing my mind," he whispered. Nicolo's phone rang, and he pulled it out of his pocket to see Adeline's name flashing on its screen. His smile was instantaneous. "Ciao, Beda," he said, as the video call brought her lovely face into view.
Ciao,
Adeline said, but she did not mirror his smile or joy.
"I can't have lost her already. I've only just found her."
"Beda, I was thinking about you and those adventures you're wanting. What if I was to take you to some of my favorite places this weekend?" To his immense relief, Adeline's features softened to allow a delicate smile, but it faded as fast as it had come.
"I've gotten a call from Giro."
It was the unenthusiastic buyer who Adeline had arranged. Surprise shot through Nicolo with a flash of adrenaline.
"He is offering 15 million euro,
Adeline continued. Just as quickly, the adrenaline vanished, leaving him feeling drained and empty in its absence.
"Oh."
It was far from the most eloquent of responses, but it was all that his conflicted mind would allow.
3 million euros short of being able to cover the fines. "I actually believe that it is a fair offer for the Romano del Mare in her current state."
Yet even Adeline's beautiful features looked strained, as if the news did not sit well with her either.
"In the resort's current state."
The words bounced off the insides of Nicolo's head to crash into other words, such as hopeless, legacy, and family. "And they will restore the Romano del Mare instead of tear her down?"
"I'm not sure that we would be able to get them to agree to make that a stipulation of the sale, but I do believe that is their intent."
"So someone else would fix the Romano del Mare," Nicolo said, more to himself than to Adeline. He sat back in his chair and sank into his own thoughts. "Would they want to keep the name?" he asked. Adeline's brows lifted.
"I'm not sure, but I think that they might."
My family name on a business being run by somebody else. His family had been down that road before, and it had literally ended in disaster. It was one thing for the Romano del Mare to be empty and in ruins, but what if the resort that the new owner put together became a joke to everyone who came to it? Or worse yet, a joke to the locals. The island had many, many ruins. There was nothing shameful in being a ruin, but it was shameful to be less than great. Then there was the issue of his family name. His family's reputation would be damaged for generations. The Romanos would forever be associated with a resort that had once been the essence of Sicily, but had been allowed to fall into disgrace. The story of the Romano del Mare would become a mortality tale, a warning to other families to be careful when selecting who would carry on the legacy of their name. "I can't do it," Nicolo said, surprising himself. He shook his head. "I can't let the Romano del Mare go yet. I will fix it. Some," he added quickly. "I will fix it enough." Enough for what? He didn't know. He only knew that he wasn't ready to let go. It was not lost on him that his need to hold on to the Romano del Mare was so strong while he was looking at Adeline. The two were now intrinsically meshed together for him. If he wanted to care for and nurture his relationship with Adeline, he had to care for and nurture the Romano del Mare. He saw that now. I will do it for you, Tiamu. I will make the Romano homestead great once more. 9. Nicolo.
Are you sure?
Adeline asked, her face alight with excitement. I have never been more unsure of anything in my life, Nicolo answered with a laugh. But it feels right.
I can help you. I've made all kinds of notes.
Adeline's image was bouncing up and down on Nicolo's little screen, and it made him happier than he ever imagined anything could. Meet me at the Romano del Mare tonight to talk things through, and then I'll take you to dinner. With the choice to make some repairs to the Romano del Mare also came a landslide of decisions to be made, and Nicolo was hoping that Adeline's obsession to see the resort restored rather than destroyed would provide him with an excellent body of research with which to tackle the job. They had a lot of work ahead of them, and he planned to make Adeline a full partner in the process. Adeline's features scrunched, and her pretty mouth frowned.
I can't tonight. I'm finalizing another sale over dinner.
Nicolo must have looked as crestfallen as he felt, because she quickly added,
A very nice couple from the mainland is coming home to retire in Sicily.
Nicolo smiled, surprised at how relieved he was that her dinner date was business-related and not pleasure. You frightened me. I thought for a moment that I might have to serenade you in order to win your affections from another man. A torture for all involved, I assure you. Adeline laughed.
If you can't sing now, how would that win me from another man?
Nicolo's voice grew in volume. I would sing so loud that it would drown his voice out. All he would hear was me. He did a closed-eye shrug. And I might call in my brothers to carry him off when you weren't looking. Adeline giggled through her fingers as they covered her mouth, but her eyes sparkled. Until tomorrow, Tiamu?
I'll see you then.
Nicolo sat back in his chair and enjoyed the afterglow of a beautiful conversation with his beautiful girl. Then his brothers, one by one, invaded his thoughts. They had trusted him. They'd tapped him with the sale of the Romano del Mare. Now he would have to tell them they were going to be prioritizing investing more money into it rather than selling it. How things could change in a day. When Adeline arrived at the Romano del Mare the next day around mid-morning, Nicolo had a picnic laid out for them on the dock. He'd brought a batard of bread, an assortment of cheeses, Marsala wine, and olives.
What have you done?
Adeline said, a bright smile on her face. Then her smile fell.
This isn't to soften the news that you've changed your mind, is it? Did your brothers refuse to back your decision to restore the resort? I know that they're co-owners.
Nicolo laughed, interrupting Adeline's sudden concerns. Beda, you worry too much. Come, let's eat. Smiling again, she brushed her light brown hair behind her ear as Nicolo showed her what he had brought for them. Then, as he held her hand to steady her, she gracefully sat atop the blanket that he'd laid at the edge of the dock. She sat her binder notebook down beside her, and within seconds, she had her shoes kicked off and was sitting, dangling her bare legs over the side with her skirt pulled up to her thighs. Nicolo, of course, followed suit. Sitting down next to her, he poured them both a glass of wine. Yet, Adeline's words were still heavy on his mind. While he had dismissed her fears, in truth they mirrored his own. He had not yet told his brothers about his change in plans, and he hoped that Adeline's enormous binder held some information that he could use to sway his brothers to support his decision.
This is nice,
she said after taking a sip. The birds played above the sea before them, diving before swooping upwards again. With the day still early, the sun was gentle, and the breeze off the Ionian Sea was forgiving.
I do love this place,
she said, sitting back to lean against her outstretched arms. Nicolo took in the glittering blue of the sea and the crystal clear water. He had traveled the world over, and there was nowhere else that had ever compared with this view, except for when he turned to look at Adeline. She was lovelier than anything else the earth had to offer. I'm so gone for her. He downed his wine in one gulp at the ramifications. Loving her meant losing her, which meant a broken heart. He was setting himself up for a world of pain. Nicolo's phone buzzed in his pants pocket, and he pulled it out. It was an email from Narrated, the owner of the company that had offered him the 500 million euro development job in India. He scanned it quickly, frowned, and then put his phone away without a response. Anything wrong? Adeline asked. She had the expression of someone who was concerned, but who also didn't want to pry. Everything is fine, Nicolo said, waving a hand through the air. I'm being called to a meeting, but it's not until next week. Work? Yes. It's for a prominent construction project in India. Oh. Adeline seemed to deflate a little, and she took another sip of wine. I guess that your work keeps you traveling a lot. Nicolo could hear her unspoken words. She wanted to know where she would fit into his life, if he was always on the other side of the world. He wished he had an answer, but he didn't. He'd had relationships before, but they never lasted much longer than the work he did in that location. Work always got the priority of his attention. It had been the truest and most lasting passion that no woman had ever been able to compete against. It shouldn't be a competition, he reminded himself, but the words fell flat in his head. It was his work that embodied all that was important to him in life, with the exception of his family. The women left behind had always faded away and were quickly forgotten as he started in on whatever project was laid out before him as his newest challenge. I won't let that happen to her, he solemnly vowed. You could come with me, he said. I could show you the world. You mean for a weekend? Nicolo shrugged. Or a month. Or two. Adeline's attention shifted to look out over the sea, and he knew that his answer had failed to impress. He understood why. Asking her to run around the world while he pursued his life was asking her to put her own life's pursuits on hold. He would get everything, but she would get only him. Then, if he was gone, she would have nothing left but memories and a life to rebuild. It was a terrible thing for him to ask of her. He knew that, and now he realized that she knew it too. Silence dragged between them until Nicolo could stand it no more. Tell me, what is it that you want to see when you look at the Romano del Mare? Adeline twisted to look over her shoulder at the sprawling building that stood a dozen yards away. Then she pivoted her hips and pulled her legs up so that she sat with the outside of her thigh pressed against the blanket and her knees together. Lights, she said. During the day, nature and the natural surroundings are what is most beautiful. But in the evening, I would love to see the Romano del Mare lit up as the star of the night. It was a very cosmetic answer that did nothing for the structural integrity that would keep the Romano del Mare's patrons safe, but he liked it all the same. He loved the way that she was always looking for the best in all she saw. To her, everything glowed with the sparkle of a jewel. A half hour later, Nicolo helped Adeline to her feet, and they headed inside the resort to talk further about the updates that needed to be done. The entire building's electrical system needs to be rewired, and the electrical systems for the kitchen, laundry, and other service areas need to be updated to meet industrial needs. The inspector found several hot spots throughout the building that could have easily turned into fires, Nicolo said, as they stood within the grand foyer. The floor was made of marble, and the ceiling reached all the way up both floors to the building's roof. High-speed internet plugins for every room with an option of individually password-protected Wi-Fi. Nicolo's mouth dropped open. Why not use one Wi-Fi signal for the entire resort? It would overload it, and the user couldn't be confident that their data uploads weren't getting intercepted and stolen. Oh, Nicolo said, feeling more than a little impressed as he shoved his hands deep inside his pockets. He rocked back on his heels and considered Adeline's suggestion. What she was recommending was addressing an actual safety issue, though not necessarily one that was life or death. The plumbing needs to be gutted and reinstalled with a new boiler as well. It was possible for the current plumbing to introduce lead contaminants into the water, and the old boiler was an explosive hazard.
Restore the existing crown molding where possible and replace it in places it can't be fixed, Adeline said.
Crown molding?
Mm-hmm,
Adeline nodded.
When buyers come into the space, while they're going to care about the updated wiring and plumbing, what they will see is the crown molding.
Nicolo tried to hide his smile. Adeline's plans seemed to be leaning toward getting the Romano del Mare ready for a new launch rather than a new owner, and he loved her ambition. He loved that when he gave an inch, she then asked for a mile. Her drive, fire, and passion were exhilarating. She was always ready to push him and challenge him, and his money meant nothing to her beyond what it could do for the Romano del Mare. And yet he was still torn. Restoring the resort would add decades and maybe even centuries to its life. He wouldn't give someone else rights to the Romano name for all that time, and he was leaning heavily toward making a name change a requirement of any future purchase of the resort, even though that stipulation would likely make selling the place all the harder. The Romano del Mare once held the clout of having within it a 5 Michelin-star restaurant. For a restaurant to have 5 stars was as rare as unicorns, and many foodies still remembered the Romano del Mare's name because of it. Its name had a lot of value, and most buyers would likely be reticent to move forward without it. And how much do you think this crown molding will cost? And do you think that its cost will be supported by an increased value of the property during a resale? Nicolo thought that he was making a sharp point with his question, but to his surprise, Adeline smiled with smug satisfaction and marched over to him with her notebook tucked snug under her arm. Pulling it out, she opened it, and then dragged her finger down one of many columns. "Here we go," she said, tapping her finger on crown molding. He followed the line item over to a column of numbers. The anticipated cost of the crown molding was marked in red, the anticipated resale value was marked in black, and then the difference between them was marked in black, indicating an increased value to the property above the loss of the expense of fixing the crown molding. Nicolo took the folder from her and started flipping through its pages. "When did you do this?" "I started on it 8 months ago, right after I signed on with Vero Immobiliare Real Estate. That they handled the account for the Romano del Mare is the reason. The only reason I accepted the job." Nicolo didn't know what to say, so he did what he did best. He looked at the columns of numbers. "I know that you told me previously that these are accurate, but I don't see how they could be," he said, and then answered his own doubt by declaring, "These can't be accurate. They're too low. Anyone willing to do the jobs at these prices would do subpar work." A tap sounded on the open front door of the Romano del Mare's main entrance. Looking up from the notebook, Nicolo saw that it was a man who looked to be in his early 50s, dressed in a rolled-sleeve, button-up shirt tucked into tan slacks that had definitely seen many a day of honest work. "Alberto!" Adeline exclaimed, and walked toward the man with open arms. They greeted each other with a 2-armed embrace and kiss to each cheek. "Alberto, this is Nicolo Romano, the owner of the Romano del Mare." "One of the owners," Nicolo said, crossing the space between them to shake Alberto's hand. "Alberto Scuderi," Alberto said, completing his introduction. His face was weathered, with deep-set wrinkles from squinting in the sun, but he had a genuine kindness to his eyes. Nicolo liked him instantly. "Alberto is a contractor that I've requested to come by to talk to us about the restoration," Adeline said. Alberto took a deep breath and looked around at the great room, while giving small nods of his head. "I've seen all of the inspection reports," he said, in a booming voice that could have belonged to an announcer, and Nicolo imagined him having to make himself heard over loud machinery. "I've walked over every inch of her space and have crawled over much of her on my hands and knees. With regard to the main building and not what's beneath her, I can do this job and do it right. The rest will need a medieval specialist." "Do you have a price in mind?" Nicolo asked, wary of what he was about to hear. He wasn't sure what renovations Alberto had in mind. They didn't need everything fixed, only the basics, those items that were issues of safety. 1.8, Alberto announced, with his broad chest puffed out. Next to him, Adeline was beaming. Nicolo repressed a cough, then leaned in as he asked, 1.8 what? Alberto's expressive brow shot up halfway to his hairline. 1.8 million euro, his voice boomed. Nicolo did cough. I'm not sure that our expectations are aligned, he said in the most congenial fashion, instead of blurting, hell no. Adeline waved her hands in the air, as if to halt Nicolo before he could say anything else. He's quoting the price for doing everything that is in the binder. Everything? Everything, Adeline assured. Just a moment, Nicolo said, excusing himself from Alberto. I need to confer with Adeline. Alberto waved them off, the whole of his attention already absorbed in the building within which he stood. Taking Adeline by the hand, Nicolo led them down the nearest corridor and around the corner, where they would be out of sight and most likely out of earshot. What exactly is he offering to do? Nicolo asked, as he started with the first page of the binder and began scanning down the list. It was written in small print, and the number of items listed on each page was extensive. This list is everything that would be needed to get the Romano del Mare completely operational again, save for the staff, stock, and the catacombs, he said in amazement. He flipped to the back of the binder and looked at the final total of estimated cost. 3.9 million euro. He's offering to do it for almost half. There's no way he could do it. He'll do a terrible job and cut corners in dangerous ways. How could you even recommend him, Adeline? He turned sharp eyes on her and was surprised to see her shoulders were back and her head was held high with determination in her eyes. She wasn't backing down at all. He's offering to do it at cost, she said, jabbing her finger at the notebook. Those numbers are based on what a builder would traditionally charge. At cost? Nicolo exclaimed, not convinced. How would he even pay his workers? It's a family business, 4 generations. His father, his uncle, him, 3 brothers, 14 nieces and nephews, 2 sons, and 8 grandsons and 2 granddaughters. One of the granddaughters is a master electrician, and he, she motioned to where they had left Alberto, is a master plumber. His father is a master carpenter, and one of his cousins is a journeyman roofer who is scheduled to be considered for master status in another year. They have experience with buildings this old, and they can even do landscaping. Nicolo wasn't sure what to say. That's a lot of mouths to feed. They have to make a living. What's in this for them? Recommend me and my family for all future maintenance of these resorts. Alberto's voice boomed from all the way in the foyer. Adeline tried to keep a straight face, but giggles overtook her, and she buried her face in Nicolo's chest. Nicolo chuckled as he kissed her head. Then she lifted her face to meet him, and he kissed her mouth. What have you done, Teamu? Everything, Adeline whispered against his lips as her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. You are everything, Teamu, Nicolo whispered back, before losing himself in another kiss. Adeline had convinced him that the Romano del Mare had a future beyond demolition. Now, he needed to convince his brothers of the same. 10. Adeline. Adeline stood at the bottom of the long, curving steps that led down to the water at the Romano del Mare, a huge camera hanging around her neck. She wore a white cotton shirt that she'd left unbuttoned with a rose-colored string bikini top underneath, and her tan roll-bottom shorts were perfect for showing off her legs. Next to her sat a huge tote stuffed full of all the various items she'd packed for her adventure-promised day. What are we doing here? She asked. You said you wanted adventure. Nicolo laughed from where he sat in the rear of a 2-seater kayak. It's time to have one. He was dressed in charcoal gray shorts that reached halfway down his muscled thighs, and his button-up light blue short-sleeved cotton shirt stood open to expose his tan and toned chest. But here? I've been here, Adeline complained, not at all convinced that whatever Nicolo had planned would measure up to the fun day of new experiences that he had promised. And where am I going to put all my stuff? Exactly, Beda. Stuff. It's just stuff. He pulled on the string that was attached to the back of the kayak and lifted a wet bag out of the water. It was designed to keep items dry as the bag floated along behind the kayak. This one is for you to fill, Adeline eyed the bag he held up. It was much, much smaller than her tote. It'll be okay. This is what adventure is. It's leaving things behind so that you can embrace what's to come.
Mm-hmm. Is that what you tell yourself every time you board that flying house of yours?
Nicolo threw back his head with a bark of laughter. You have me. Guilty. I need to learn from your example and travel light. He wiggled the empty wet bag in the air, and his eyes sparkled with mischief. To her chagrin, Adeline couldn't stop Nicolo's infectious laughter and smile from reaching her, and she found herself smiling just as big back at him. She had been wanting adventure, and now was her chance. So what that it didn't look like the way she had imagined it would? After all, having everything you experienced planned out wasn't an exciting way to have an adventure. She needed to let go and trust. Leaning over, she snatched the bag from Nicolo and then dumped all of her belongings out of her tote onto the small boat landing. She selected the snack bars, bottled water, sunscreen, and an assortment of other small items before piling her change of shoes, clothes, and towels back into her tote. At the bottom of it all, she stashed the heavy camera, deciding her cell phone's camera would have to do. As for her sunglasses, she perched them atop her head. I'm ready, she announced, tossing the wet bag back into the water. The look that Nicolo gave her was full of adoration and pride, so much so that it made her cheeks heat in a blush. A part of her knew that his affection wasn't deserved, though. She'd lied to him and had manipulated him into doing what she thought was right. The more she got to know him, the more she regretted using him in that way. He meant something to her. He was important to her, and his opinion of her was important to her. If he knew the truth. She pushed the thought out of her head. Taking hold of Nicolo's steadying hand, Adeline made her way into the kayak. It swayed precariously to and fro, but steadied quickly once she'd sat down. Nicolo pushed them away from the boat landing with the tip of his paddle, and then they were off, gliding through the gently rippling waters. They both paddled, but Nicolo steered, guiding them out of the Romano del Mare's small bay. Rounding the edge of the bay, to have open sea on one side and the island on the other, Nicolo kept them within easy swimming distance of land as they made their way down the rocky and cliff-riddled Sicilian coast. The land was arid and jagged, but with a beautiful resilience that had withstood salt, storms, and the pounding seas for centuries. It was a testament to strength and endurance, and its startling beauty could be found in the most unexpected places. Adeline marveled that she had never taken the time to see Sicily beyond what was offered to the everyday tourist. She had overlooked so much of Sicily's beauty. 45 minutes into the trip, Nicolo angled the kayak's nose toward a sheer rock face. What are you doing? Adeline asked, as they neared the sheer wall of granite. The cliff towered above them, taller than the Romano del Mare would, if they were to stand at her door. Do you trust me? Of course I trust you, but... Adeline held her breath as the kayak's tip got closer to the rocks. But then the kayak's angle changed, and so did Adeline's whole world. With the side of the kayak practically touching the cliff face, the kayak's nose now pointed at an opening, a channel with walls as high as the cliff itself. It had not been visible from further away because of how the rocky face of the cliff jutted out and blocked the opening from being seen. Adeline instinctively pulled her paddle from the waters and held them against the side of the kayak as Nicolo navigated them through the narrow channel of rock. 10 feet in, the channel curved, and the tip of the kayak's bow scraped the wall in front of it, but Nicolo managed to keep them moving forward. Adeline gasped as the end of the channel came into view, and the entire world as she knew it changed yet again. Just like stepping through a door, Adeline found herself in an island bowl of stone and water. The cliffs towered in every direction, and when she looked at the clear water below, she could just make out an underwater bottom that she guessed had to be about 10 feet down. It looked to be stone as well. How did you find this place? Adeline asked, her voice full of awe. It was actually Leonardo, one of my older brothers. He showed it to me when we were kids.
Touch the water, Betta.
Adeline dipped her fingers into the clear, glass-smooth water as the kayak glided forward. She gasped again. It was as warm as a heated swimming pool. Eats all of the rock in the shallow bottom. The sun heats it up. Adeline was already stripping off her shirt when she eagerly asked,
We're swimming, right?
That's the plan. Nicolo laughed. Adeline shimmied out of her shorts to reveal her string bikini bottom underneath, and then tipped herself head first into the water. She dove deep, determined to touch the bottom with the tips of her fingers before shooting back up to the surface for air. She was amazed at how the water got warmer instead of cooler the deeper down she went, as heat radiated off the rock bottom. Reaching the surface, she splashed Nicolo, then squealed and swam away as he stood up in the kayak and tore his own shirt off. A huge splash followed close behind her as Nicolo cannonballed in, and he had her in his arms just as Adeline was about to reach the bowl's edge. Turning to face him, Adeline wrapped her arms and legs around him as he held them aloft with one steadying hand on the cliff's face. Sinking her fingers into Nicolo's thick, wet hair, she took charge in a kiss that soon had them both gasping for air.
I want to make love here,
Adeline declared. Nicolo's eyes darkened with a smoldering heat that quickened Adeline's heart and sent tingles through her body.
Take a deep breath, Tiamo,
Nicolo instructed.
Take another.
He mimicked her, taking deep breaths as well. Then he dove, taking them both down until their bodies separated, but they kept one hand linked. Nicolo led her down, so far down that Adeline feared she would have to break away and go back to the surface for air. But then she saw it. A small underwater cavern opening near the bottom of the rock bowl. Adeline's heart raced with fear. Underwater caverns were dangerous. People got lost in them and drowned in them, and they weren't even wearing any scuba gear. Nicolo forged on, though, and this was the adventure she'd requested. So she chose to believe and followed. Nicolo's hand tightened on hers into an unbreakable grip when the light faded to pitch black. The water was instantly colder, but not as cold as the open sea. 5 seconds later, maybe 10, just as true panic had crept its way into her heart, a bending shimmer of light reassured Adeline that the worst had passed. All the while, Nicolo was by her side, swimming and guiding. His strong strokes kept them moving forward faster than she could have done on her own. He moved with confidence and an absence of doubt. And when he angled them upward into the moving, dancing light, she held on to his one hand with both of hers as he torpedoed them up to the surface. Adeline broke through the water's surface, gasping for air, and she threw her shaking, trembling limbs around Nicolo as he guided them through the water to a rock ledge at the far wall of the small, dark cavern. With an elbow on the ledge and another around her thighs just below her bottom, Nicolo lifted Adeline to sit on the ledge before hoisting himself up as well. Adeline stared out at the view in front of her.
Where is this place? She whispered.
Even though her voice echoed in the small cavern, she felt as though she were in a cathedral, in a holy place meant for God and angels. Beams of light broke through small cracks in the rock face to create ribbons of light dancing in the water.
I've never seen anything so beautiful.
I have, Nicolo said, sliding his arm around her hip. Every day that I look at you, I love you, Adeline. I know that it's fast, but I will not deny the truth of how my heart feels for you.
My grandfather said that he knew he would marry my grandmother within 5 minutes of meeting her,
Adeline said, shyly, kicking herself for bringing up such a subject as marriage. If she was anything like you, I understand why. Sliding a hand behind her neck to cup her head, Nicolo took Adeline in a kiss that curled her toes.
I love you too,
she breathed into his mouth.
Sorry, readers. Here's where we fade to black due to YouTube explicit content guidelines. If you dream for the steam, you'll need to take a look in the book.
Don't fall. Don't do it. But it was no use. Her heart was gone, and she leaned her ear against his whispering lips as he continued to espouse her beauty to the heavens above in the language of his homeland.
I love you,
She let her mouth form the words, but she did not give them voice. He might have her heart, but she wasn't ready to let him know that. Not yet. Someday. Soon. She hoped. But not yet. 11. Adeline. Adeline had to swallow hard to keep from getting sick. Through the small window of Nicolo's private jet, she could see the rolling hills of Tuscany's southern region, with its olive orchards and grape vineyards, ease past. It was beautiful, but she couldn't get any pleasure out of it. All she could think of was the lie that hung between her and Nicolo. Every time she looked at him now, it was her deception that she saw. It was the misuse of the man she now knew she loved. She had to tell him the truth. Tonight. It was going to destroy what they had. It was going to ruin everything, but she couldn't go on hiding the truth anymore. Keeping that secret was tearing her apart. Nicolo's fingers laced with hers on the armrest, and she turned to give him a weak smile. The best smile she could muster. "You've been so quiet," Nicolo said, his brows pinched with worry. "I thought for sure you'd have to cancel again." She hated herself a little more in that moment for putting the blame for her being out of sorts on him. That she was a wreck wasn't his fault, and she gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "I'm so sorry, Beta. Negotiations for the new development project in India is requiring a lot more attention than I'd expected." "What about after the negotiations are done? What happens then?" If she were being honest with herself, she had to admit that she was not their only problem. Nicolo had been more and more absent from her life. Over the last 6 weeks, his visits to Sicily had become less and less frequent and increasingly shorter. Even the nightly phone calls had dropped to a call once every 3 nights or so. He was drifting away from her like an unmoored boat being pulled out with the tide. All she could do was stand on the shore and watch it happen. Nicolo's lips parted in preparation to say something, but the pilot's voice over the intercom interrupted him, leaving Adeline's question unanswered. "Arrival in Montepulciano in 5 minutes. Please prepare for landing by returning to your seats and buckling your safety belts." "The pilot has made arrangements to land on an airfield not far from the town," Nicolo said, as he buckled her in. "It's not a full-fledged airport. It's mostly just a landing strip for planes to land and then take back off." "Then," he said, with an uptick of excitement in his voice, "instead of a car, I've requested a Vespa to be waiting for us." "Like a motorcycle, right?" "See, Beta, I want to show you a good time tonight. A fun time. No stress and no worry." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it before shifting his attention to buckling himself in. "I have a confession to make, Beta." Adeline's heart skipped a beat, and hope surged within her. If he already knew her secret and was not mad at her, that meant that all was fine. It meant that they would be fine. "I got a call from the boss man himself today. They were holding a last-minute meeting, and they wanted me to be there, but their last-minute meets can go on all night. I knew that I would have to cancel on you yet again, and I couldn't do it. So I told the boss man, no." The Riche was not happy. Nicolo shifted so that he could look directly into Adeline's eyes. "But it didn't matter. I had to get back to you. I couldn't go one more day without seeing you, Beta." Adeline's heart sank, but she did her best to keep a smile on her face. Her stomach turned over, and once again she thought she might be sick. Nicolo didn't know what she had done, and things between them would be far, far from okay. The plane landed smoothly, and the two of them disembarked before climbing onto the waiting cream-colored Vespa. With a helmet already on, Adeline leaned into Nicolo's strong back and wrapped her arms around his tight waist. Nicolo started the Vespa's engine, and then gave her hands a rub where they lay flat against his abs, as if letting her know that they were about to move. He was always thinking of her, always looking out for her. He wanted to protect her, she knew, and it made her betrayal of him sit all the more painfully inside of her. Holding on to him with every ounce of love that she could pour into him, Adeline lost herself in the passing countryside. It was more beautiful than anywhere she'd ever seen, except for Sicily, of course. There was no traffic on the road as they headed into Montepulciano. There was only good, clean air and a sense of time having slowed down. Nobody rushed here. Everything happened in its due time, and Adeline wished that she could hit pause so that their night together would never end. I'll do better, I promise. She just needed him to let them get past this coming moment when she would tell him everything. If he would do that, then they would be okay. But if he cut her off and would have nothing more to do with her, that would be the end of them. She'd have no chance to show him that everything else about their relationship had been genuine. She cared more about him than he knew. She cared more about him than anything else. But they had to face tomorrow together, or she'd have no chance to regain his trust. They'd be done. In the sky, the day's soft glow had reached the magic hour, not long before nightfall, that time when the whole world seemed gentle and serene. By the time they reached the restaurant, Locanda Sisolina, the sun had reached its laziest spot in the sky just above the horizon. Inside the restaurant, they sat next to a window in order to enjoy the view of the sweeping olive orchard. Nicolo ordered maltagliati, made with fresh herbs, garden vegetables, and local cheeses, and Adeline ordered pappardelle, made with scallops and wild mushrooms. She wasn't sure how she'd managed to eat, but she'd forced herself through it. Course after course of food came before and after their main selection, starting with aperitivo, a light selection of drinks and appetizers. An assortment of wines were brought for tasting throughout. Through it all, Adeline remained demure, as Nicolo tried again and again to pull her into spirited conversation. She could see his efforts, but she couldn't make herself rise to them. Her heart was bleeding out from inside her chest, and the room's air was getting thicker, making it hard to breathe. Soon, so soon, she was going to destroy what mattered most to her, but she couldn't go on without telling him the truth. She had to go through with it. She couldn't face one more sleepless night thinking about it. Adeline, Nicolo said, reaching between them, you worry my heart. Adeline smiled weakly. It was the best she could do. I'm sorry. I've been feeling a little worn down lately. Picking up her hand, Nicolo brought her fingers to his lips. I've put too much on you. I've abandoned you to oversee all of the Romano del Mare's renovations. I know that you have your own work and life to live, Betta. I have been unfair to you. Adeline's eyes stung with unshed tears. Shaking her head the barest amount, she looked everywhere but at him. What is it? Nicolo asked, his voice full of worry. I've lied to you, Nicolo, Adeline said, her lower lip trembling. What? No, you cannot, Nicolo said, as if to reassure her. I did, Adeline insisted, nodding her head. That buyer, the one I arranged to see the resort, he was a fake. There was never any offer to buy the Romano del Mare. I lied to you. The words were out, and Adeline braced herself for the shattering of her entire world. Nicolo. Nicolo's head pulled back, but his hands held on to hers. No. How can you know the mind of a buyer in and out? No, he was never a buyer. He was doing me a favor by coming and seeming to be interested. She sniffled. Wanted you to believe that someone would want the Romano del Mare restored. I wanted you to believe that she could be whole again. You mean so much to me. I couldn't stand this lie being between us any longer. It's been eating away at me. I couldn't take it anymore. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Nicolo sat back in his chair, and Adeline's hand slipped out of his fingers. He was a fake? Within him, the sun set, and the world went black. Adeline was not who he'd thought she was. How could he love someone who did not exist? Adeline pressed her trembling lips together and nodded her head. She finally looked at him instead of everywhere else, and a heavy tear fell from the curve of her lower lid to her cheek. He should lean forward and brush her tear away. But he stayed as he was, leaning back with his arms fallen at his sides. Me and My family committed to spending millions more on the renovation of the Romano del Mare on top of the millions already owed.
And we did it because you manipulated my pride.
Nicolo's voice was monotone, empty. It was a reflection of the hollowness of his chest.
My pride,
a voice within him reminded himself. His pride had taken him down his current path. That was true. It was not Adeline, not really. She had not made him do anything that he had not wanted to do. But that did not keep his blood from boiling. It did not stop his feelings of being misused and manipulated. She had used his feelings for her against him, and rage filled him as he stared at her, wondering where the girl he thought he'd known had gone.
"Who are you?"
he asked, bewildered. A strangled sob escaped Adeline in response to his question, and she covered her mouth with shaking fingers.
"I'm sorry. I'm so sorry,"
she said again. She reached her other hand across the table, but he did not lift his hands to meet her. Instead, he remained as he was with his arms hanging down.
"I have never loved anyone as I have loved you. And it's clouded my judgment. You have made a fool of me. A fool, Beta. I am a man who loves you. And you have made me a fool."
He slammed his closed fist into his chest above his heart.
"You make me wonder if it's better to not love at all if women can be trusted to have no honor. You use me to get what you want, and me and my family will pay the cost of your childish wants and fairy tale dreams. It costs you nothing. Not honor, because you had none to begin with. Not money, because money has no value if it's in someone else's hands. And it did not even cost you me, because a fake person," he motioned a hand to indicate her, "cannot truly lose anything because they didn't exist in the first place."
Nicolo stood up so abruptly from the table that his chair flipped over onto the hardwood floor with a clatter. Then, turning on his heel, he stalked off to the kitchens and left Adeline crying at the table. In less than 2 minutes, he was back with a young man dressed in black pants, a sleeveless t-shirt, and a full-length apron.
"This is Pietro. He is going to take you back to the plane, and the plane will take you back to Sicily. I'll make sure that there is a car waiting for you to drive you home from there."
He couldn't stand to be near her for another minute. He had been nothing more than her marionette, and he was cutting the strings. Adeline's large, round eyes went wide as her tender lips parted. It took a moment to find her voice.
"You're not coming?"
"The plane will come back for me. I am needed in India." He had planned on renting a car and driving down to the tip to take a ferry across to Sicily. But there was no point. There was no one in Sicily that he wanted to see. 12. Nicolo.
"You did what?"
Leonardo demanded. Nicolo flinched and then remembered that his brother could see him over the video screen.
"It will work out," Nicolo reassured. "We can sell the Romano del Mare for much more if she is fully restored. If we show her to be a proven earner, it will benefit us all the more."
"Oh, we will get back to that, and your decision to move forward with fixing her without including either of us in the decision. But I'm talking about Adeline. Are you telling me that you have already messed things up with her?"
"What do you care about Adeline?" Nicolo exclaimed.
His personal affairs were none of his brother's business. It was true that he had not spoken with or seen Adeline in weeks. What he wasn't telling his brother was that her lingering absence from his life had not been his idea. Since that night in southern Tuscany, she had refused to take his phone calls. He had been tied up in India during all of that time and had not the chance to track her down in person, but that had changed. His feet were finally back on Sicilian ground. It had taken him nearly a week of thought and self-reflection to soften his anger and to see Adeline more clearly. Fueling his inner reflection was the misery that had descended on him in Adeline's absence. She had done him wrong. She had done his entire family wrong. But that did not change all the ways that she was good for him. And she was good for him. She'd made him want something more than living a transient life with no connections. She had made him want to belong to someone, and his life was empty and without purpose without her in it. All of the goals he'd set for himself and that he'd thought were important became meaningless. His achievements meant nothing without her to share them with. I care about you, little brother. You finally found someone to come back to. You found your anchor. Now you're telling me that you've thrown her overboard. She lied, Nicolo exclaimed. He still cared more about her lie than he wanted to. It had been difficult to let go of her deceit with full forgiveness. I don't care if she did. You have to get her back, Leonardo yelled with equal passion. So she had you wrapped around her little finger. So she manipulated you into doing what she wanted. You know what that is? That's a woman you want on your side. That's a woman who will move mountains to take care of and provide for the ones she loves. Who named the Romano del Mare? It felt like a trick question, but Nicolo answered anyway. Nano. And who told Nano that he wanted to name it the Romano del Mare? Nicolo pursed his lips. Nana was always the drive for our family, and Nana was her engine. And you know what? What? Nicolo asked, crossing his arms over his chest. That man never had an unhappy day in his life that he spent with her, Leonardo declared. And it was true. He trusted her. He gave her the reins of the family because she was focused on the present, the past, and the future. She saw it all. She saw how it was all connected, and when he didn't agree with her, he still did what she wanted because her finger was on the pulse of the family. And family is what it's all about. She was his anchor. She was his home, Nicolo, and now you've thrown your home away. Nicolo shrugged his shoulders, as if his brother's words didn't matter. But they did. Less than 2 days after his dinner with Adeline, Nicolo had no longer cared that she had manipulated his pride. Actually, he hadn't even cared from the very beginning. It was his ego being taken down a peg that had made him so upset. He had not thought that his pride was such a blinding part of who he was, but she had taught him that it was himself he could not trust. That had hurt. That had taken time for him to learn how to accept. She won't take my phone calls, Nicolo finally admitted. All of this time, it's her who has thrown me overboard, not the other way around. She's done with me. His throat tightened as his heart skipped beats. He was no longer a whole man without her. She had made a space for herself inside his heart, and with her gone, there was an emptiness there. He'd even called her place of work and had asked to be patched through to her, but they told him she had taken an extended leave of absence. It's not that large of an island, brother. Find her. I will, Nicolo said, making the promise to himself even if tracking her meant traveling to Spain and searching its every corner. Their call ended, and Nicolo made his way to Adeline's home. Bounding up the stairs to her second-floor apartment, he knocked with one hand while holding a large bouquet of yellow sunflowers in the other. He'd chosen sunflowers because they were Adeline's favorite, but also because she was the light of his life. While the sunflowers didn't shine as bright as she did, they were at least a token gift representing how he felt about her. There was no answer. So he surmised she was either still refusing to speak to him or she wasn't at home. Nicolo leaned forward and held his ear close to the door to see if he could hear movement inside. All was silent. From the floor below, however, he heard the shuffle of feet and then the closing of a door. Heading back downstairs, Nicolo examined the door options of the nearby apartments and chose to knock on the one closest to the building's entrance. If he wasn't mistaken, it would be the home of the building's landlord. No sooner had he tapped his knuckles against the painted wood than the door opened to reveal an elderly lady with her gray hair pulled into a bun atop her head and glasses worn on the tip of her nose. She took longer looking Nicolo over from head to toe and back up again than she'd taken to open the door. A slow smile lit her face when her gaze came to rest on the bouquet of flowers. Nicolo looked from the landlady to the flowers and back again. Then Arming himself with his most charming smile, he bent low and presented the elderly lady with the bouquet. Taking the flowers, she cradled them in her arm like a baby, and her smile grew all the brighter. "I am looking for Adeline Peluso, senora. Would you know where she is?" The landlady's mouth pursed, and her eyes drifted up in thought before refocusing on him to answer, "It's Tuesday." Nicolo waited for more of an explanation, but none came. "I'm sorry, senora. What happens on Tuesday?" "Adeline likes to study on Tuesdays." "She's taking classes?" Nicolo was beginning to feel as though he hadn't known her at all. Did I make the entire relationship about me? "Can you tell me where she studies?" The woman answered with a nod. "Conchita's, in the square, but her study will end soon. Where she goes after that?" The woman shrugged. "Grazie," Nicolo said, bending low to kiss her free hand. She waved him off as he ran out the door. He didn't bother to get in his car and drive the distance, but opted to run instead. He darted down narrow alleyways, up streets that wound uphill, and through an open-air market before reaching the town square. There, tucked away in one corner, pushed back and almost invisible to allow for a street entrance, Nicolo found Conchetta's. The door chimed as he pushed inside. He was still a little out of breath, but he was catching his wind fast. The space inside the small shop was cramped, and on every available surface hung every type of lace he could ever imagine. The work was intricate, complex, and beyond exquisite. "May I help you?" asked a tall, slender woman whose body seemed younger than her crinkled eyes hinted. "I am looking for Adeline Peluso." As soon as the words were out of his mouth, everything about the woman's countenance changed. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes narrowed. Her shoulders went back. She stood taller, and she clasped her hands before her. "Oh!" She looked him over from head to toe and back up again, just as the landlady had done. "I will ask if she is available to be seen." "Wait," Nicolo said quickly, as the woman turned to make her way into the back of the shop. This was his one shot. He could feel it in his gut. If he got turned away without getting to talk to Adeline this time, she would find a way to be gone from his life forever. "Please, give her a message. Tell her that I am—" He swallowed, then blurted. "Tell her that I'm not a fool, but that I'm her fool." The woman didn't move except that her eyes lit, and the corners of her smile pulled up ever so slightly. Then, squaring her shoulders again, she said, "No." Nicolo wanted to throw his arms down in frustration. Barging into the back would win him no points with Adeline, but he had to see her. He had to tell her how he felt. "You can tell her yourself," the woman added, her smile growing. Leaping over the counter that separated them, Nicolo took the woman's face in his hands and planted a big kiss on her cheek before rushing through the door that led to the back of the shop. He wove his way past mountains of supplies and works in progress until finally, toward the back, space opened up for a collection of women to sit while they worked. It was at that point that he froze. He didn't speak. He watched, and he saw. Adeline sat with her head bent over a pillow in her lap. Atop the pillow was a piece of paper sewn on cloth, and on top of that paper, Adeline was stitching the delicate design of a butterfly. The thread was thin, and every stitch she made only grew the butterfly by the merest amount. Yet her focus remained, and she kept working. To him, the work that was left to be done on her butterfly seemed insurmountable. But if it was, that message had not reached her nimble fingers. To Adeline, the impossible was possible, and the improbable was an absolute. "She can move mountains, and she can build my world." One of the ladies lifted a head and saw him, and her work stopped, then another, and another. Soon, it was only Adeline who worked. Finally, she too stopped, looked to either side of her, and then followed the other woman's gazes to him. "Nicolo," she whispered, and let her now still hands rest in her lap. "I am an idiot. I am a fool, Nicolo said, stepping into the half-circle created by the woman's chairs. He got down on his knees before Adeline and took one of her hands in his own. But whatever I am a better man with you in my life. I'm so sorry, Adeline said, tears welling in her eyes. I'm not. I'm stubborn and pig-headed and rarely ever look life past the end of my nose. If I had sold the Romano del Mare to be destroyed, I would have been haunted by it for the rest of my life. My grandparents poured their entire lives into the resort, and I was ready to bulldoze it to the ground just because the going had gotten a little hard. I don't want to do that now. I want to have more to show for my life than to destroy the legacy left for me. It would have left a hole in my soul that I would have never been able to fill. You saved me from that fate, Adeline. You pushed me into keeping what is dear to me by giving me the chance to give it up. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't ready to see her go. Nicolo brushed a tear from Adeline's cheek. I'm not ready to see you go either, Beta. You're a part of me. I know that I'm a foolish man, but will you give me another chance? Adeline pushed her lace into the lap of the woman next to her, and then threw herself into Nicolo's arms, knocking him backward. With her on top of him, pinned beneath her, she rained kisses down upon his face to mingle with her still-falling tears. Shoo, shoo, the tall woman from the front of the shop said, clapping her hands at them both as the other women laughed. Take me home, Adeline demanded of Nicolo, following with a big kiss on his lips. Nicolo didn't even have to think of where she meant. His mind did not imagine his plane. He saw her and him. Everything else was a blur. The rest didn't matter. 13. Nicolo. Nicolo looked at his ringing phone and moaned. It was his older brother, Gian-Pierre. Despite Leonardo's early words of support, Nicolo already caught an earful from him about his decision to fully renovate the Romano del Mare, rather than do simple repairs, or sell her as a doomed building, and he didn't want to hear it from Gian-Pierre too. The man cared nothing for the resort their grandfather had built. All he cared about was getting elbow-deep in medieval architecture, and while the Romano del Mare was the perfect site for him to do just that, the man avoided working in Italy like the plague. But that was his issue, and not something Nicolo was willing to think about at the moment. Ignoring the call, he allowed it to go to voicemail. Then, picking up the phone, he called Adeline. The restoration of the resort was snowballing, and he needed to know that she had his back. With the development project in India heavy into the design phase, he didn't have time to oversee every detail of what was Adeline's passion project. He needed to know that she was willing to step up and take control during the times that he was away, which was most of the time of late. Adeline's phone went to voicemail, just as he'd allowed his phone to do when Gian-Pierre had called him. Nicolo scowled at his phone. He'd been in India for the last 2.5 weeks. He thought that he would get to spend time with Adeline when he returned to Sicily, but she'd been busy every time that he'd reached out to her. While he'd been gone to India, she'd flown to Spain for a meeting with the real estate agency to which she'd applied. Even though she'd made them wait, they still wanted her. That's fine, he reassured himself. If she moves to Spain, I'll go between India and Spain. Nothing changes. She'll still be my girl. Those were the words that came out of his mouth, but not even he believed them. Everything was changing. All 3 days that he'd been back in Sicily, he'd used nearly every waking hour to address concerns relating to the renovation. He had thought that Adeline would be his feet on the ground, his on-point person to handle the day-to-day issues that arose, but she was becoming less and less available to oversee the project. He'd been counting on her to be able to handle it so that he could continue his work in India. Without her to fill the gaps, he'd have to restructure his entire life. Picking up the phone, he sent Adeline a text. Dinner tonight. He watched the phone's screen for a response. Little bubbles rippled across it to show that Adeline was typing. Then the little bubbles stopped, then started again. This went on for several minutes, but no message appeared. When Nicolo was almost ready to give up and call her again, a message finally blipped into existence on his screen. Sure. Nicolo's stomach cramped. There was more that she wasn't saying, and there was no way that it could be good. Pulling up Google, Nicolo calculated the flight hours between India and Spain. It was longer than India to Sicily, but he would have to make it work. Who would oversee the Romano del Mare? His brothers had both sworn that because he'd made the decision to renovate the resort on his own, it was his responsibility to oversee the project. So, India to Sicily, then Sicily to Spain, then back to India. He worked out the schedule in his head before pulling up a spreadsheet that included a timetable of events for both projects. Work in India would require a minimum of 3 years to complete, and that timetable would only be achievable under optimal weather conditions. It was possible that the project would extend to as long as 5 years. Crunching the numbers and being as honest with himself as he could, he considered how often he would be able to spend time with Adeline in person. With balancing both projects, plus time for air travel, he would get to see Adeline an average of once every 4.5 weeks, for approximately a day and a half. Groaning, he put his face in his hands. Something was going to have to change. He had no room in his life for Adeline. Adeline.
Nicolo, you know how much I've enjoyed our time together,
Adeline said, reaching across the table for his hand. They'd barely seen each other since they made up. Eventually, she'd stopped talking to him. It had been hard, but she made peace with the fact that Nicolo wouldn't be staying in her life. When she'd refused to answer his phone calls or text messages, she'd thought he'd given up and simply fade away as someone she'd once known. For him to do so was for the best. Their time together was ending. Her life was changing too much and too fast to continue to adjust her needs to his whims. She'd accepted the job in Spain, and besides that, she needed someone stable, someone who was going to be there for her more than when it fit his busy schedule. It was time to make Nicolo understand that. Nicolo had offered to drive them up the coast for dinner, but she told him she was tired and wanted to keep it simple. Both were true. So they decided on a little bistro in town. Now they sat at one of the curbside tables, and Adeline found herself wanting to escape from the way Nicolo stared at her. He could not pull his attention away from the paleness of Adeline's skin or the dark circles under her eyes. Adeline, de amor, are you well? You're so pale. But you have dark circles under your eyes, and you've lost weight. I can tell. You're like a frail bird. Are you not sleeping? Are you not eating? What is wrong? His words poured out, but a silence met them. When Adeline didn't say anything right away, he cleared his throat and spoke again. I know that you mean to break up with me. Nobody starts a conversation with, I've enjoyed our time together, if they don't mean to end that time together. I know you must be upset with me for how strongly I reacted to your confession in Tuscany. I am a passionate man, but I know myself. I know that a life without you is incomprehensible, and it is unacceptable. If you are sick, Adeline, tell me. I will find you the best doctors in the world. I would build a hospital for you if that's what it takes. I'm just tired, Adeline reassured Nicolo. His concern was sweet, but in this case it was misplaced. She'd been fine without him during their time apart, and she would continue to be fine without him as time moved on. She didn't need him, not anymore. She didn't need a part-time distraction. If you are not well, do not keep it from me, Adeline. Tell me. Nicolo's stern voice bit her. I'm okay, Nicolo, I promise. You've been to a doctor? Adeline paused before answering, then said, Yes. She says that I am well. She said that I need to take things a little easy and give myself more time for rest. Nicolo's cheeks colored. And here I've been, asking so much of you with the overseeing of the Romano del Mare's renovation. I have done this to you, and I hate myself for it. He kissed her hand. Please forgive me. There's nothing to forgive. It's just life. Fatigue settled into her bones, and she fought the urge to simply leave to go home and take a nap. It was true, the doctor had said she was fine, but the doctor had also said that she would never be the same again. But it's a life that can be different, no? I know that I've been busy and that business has kept me away. And I know that it's not fair to you. Our love is so young, yet I've asked for so much patience from you. I've taken advantage of your generous nature. At Nicolo's use of the word love, Adeline felt the wall she'd constructed around her heart crumble. It left her exposed and suddenly vulnerable to everything about him. His strength, his kindness, and the way he made her feel in the middle of the night when he moved inside of her. He was the first thing she thought about when she woke in the morning, and the last thing she thought about as she drifted to sleep at night. Adeline's cheeks grew hot, and she fought the urge to reach out a hand to him, but she wouldn't allow herself. She wouldn't let him treat her as second in line to everything else about his life any longer. I have felt like a part-time girlfriend, she admitted, finding the words she needed to say. That is not what I want in a relationship, Nicolo. I want a full-time partner. My life is changing. I know, Nicolo interrupted, and it's exciting. The job in Spain, I know they want you very much. They see in you the amazing person that I see. How could anyone do otherwise than to love you, Ti amo? But I wonder, could the adventure and opportunity that's offered in Spain also be found in India? Nicolo seemed to hold his breath. Nicolo, I don't know what to say. Adeline blinked, stunned at the sudden turn. The lifestyles between Spain and India are so different. It's not what I want for myself. Nicolo's shoulders sank as if her answer weighed heavy on them, but he nodded his head in seeming acceptance of her answer. Adeline, I'm pregnant. It was Adeline's turn to interrupt, and she watched as shock registered on Nicolo's face. You're what? Adeline didn't repeat herself. She knew that he'd heard her. It's why I'm leaving you, she said instead. A breath of air left Nicolo's body, as if he'd been punched in the gut. Adeline. Nicolo reached for her hands, but she pulled away. His gaze traveled over her face, and a new understanding seemed to dawn within him. You've been sick, he said, with morning sickness. Adeline nodded. She was telling the father of her unborn child that she did not want him in her life, or the life of their child. Miserable did not even begin to describe how she felt. It's why you've lost weight, and you're tired because of the sickness and the pregnancy and... He paused, studying her. The stress. You're never here, Nicolo. I don't want a part-time partner, and I don't want a part-time father to my baby. We deserve more than that. Nicolo blinked slowly, as if still in a state of shock. But when he spoke, his voice was sure and full of confidence. Adeline, life can be different. Please give me a chance. A tear fell from her eye as she shook her head. You shouldn't have to give up your dream. You've got the life you want. I don't want you to stop living the life you love. I don't want you to wake up years from now and resent me, or worse, hate me, because of all you had to sacrifice for me. For us. She put a hand on her lower belly. It was still flat, but she knew the child was inside. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Adeline continued. I'm leaving for Spain again the day after tomorrow. I'll be finalizing a job offer and then starting preparations for my move there. I know that you'll be gone by the time I get back. I don't want to see you again after today. There was hurt on Nicolo's face when she spoke those words, but it was the way it needed to be. She wouldn't have a transient father coming in and out of her child's life. She wouldn't allow Nico to shower it with over-the-top affection, only to neglectfully ignore it when life made being around inconvenient. It had been difficult enough for Adeline to handle the way he was in and out of her life as a whim, all based on his wants and his needs. A child wouldn't be equipped to understand that his constant leaving wasn't about it, and she would not have her child thinking it was less than. Less loved, less worthy, less valued, just because its father couldn't be bothered to be around. No way, no how. But she wasn't heartless.
When the time comes, you can meet the baby, of course, but I don't want you confusing the little one by making them think that you'll be around to see their school plays or—" Her voice broke. "Tuck them in the bed. I don't want them to think that they can depend on you to be there the next day."
Tears stung Adeline's eyes. She felt as though she was being torn in two. Nicolo leaned back from the table, and he shook his head, causing fear to grow within Adeline that he would not honor her wishes. His body was stiff, and his hands were balled into tight, white-knuckled fists. When he spoke, his normally expressive voice was flat. "Whatever you want, Adeline. Anything at all. I'll do whatever you want. Whatever you think is best for you. Whatever is best for our child." Adeline's heart broke. He'd accepted her terms. The love of her life was leaving her life. 14. Adeline. It had been 2 weeks since Adeline's feet had been on Sicilian ground, and she had to admit that it felt good to be home again. Home. It was not a word that she could attach to Sicily much longer, and that was an unnerving thought. Even when she was growing up in America, under the care of an agoraphobic and overprotective mother, she had always held Sicily as her home within her heart. But she was going to have to give that dream up, and it was time to say goodbye to the Romano del Mare. Though she wouldn't do that without seeing it at least one last time. Spain wanted her in place as soon as the middle of next week, and moving that quickly would take her every spare moment to make all of the necessary arrangements.
"Grazie,"
she said, as she was handed her cappuccino to-go cup. She'd made sure she'd gotten decaf because of the baby, but she was still in Sicily. She would have her morning cappuccino. Giving that up on top of everything else would simply be too much to deal with. She needed her creature comforts. Her thoughts turned to the medieval resort that held so many fond memories for her. She'd achieved her long-time goal of getting the resort restored, though the restorations would take months to complete. It was bittersweet that as the place she had loved most as a child, its second chance at life was going to be met without her. But it was as it had to be. She couldn't stay, not after all that had happened between her and Nicolo. The Romano del Mare was no longer just the place that she had learned about life and love through the time that she had spent there with her grandparents. Now, the Romano del Mare was also the place where she had lost her heart and had her life completely altered. She was about to become a single mother, and it was the most terrifying adventure of all. Slipping inside her car, she put her drink in its cup holder and set off to the one place that she wanted to be most. She needed to reconnect with the life that she was leaving behind. It was a life she had loved.
"Am I making a mistake? I could stay and teach the bambina about her heritage."
In truth, she could not think of anywhere else that she would rather raise her child than on the sleepy island of Sicily with its laid-back lifestyle. The people were happy and kind, and life was never rushed. It was a rich heritage, and for the 100th time, Adeline began to doubt herself and her decisions. But in her gut, she knew that leaving was the way it had to be. If she stayed, it would be too easy, too convenient for Nicolo to waltz in and out of their lives. Whether he thought it was or not, Sicily was the place that Nicolo would always gravitate back to. She wouldn't allow their child to be hurt by having a part-time father who came and left when he had nothing better to do. So, she had to leave Sicily. It took only 15 minutes to reach the Romano del Mare. The parking lot was scattered with several vehicles of various kinds, and with her windows down, Adeline could hear the shouts of people working and hammers banging inside. As far as she could tell, the restoration was moving forward at a good pace, and Alberto and his large family were doing an excellent job. Adeline parked at the far edge of the parking lot so as to be out of the way. But that was only part of the truth. The other part of it was that she didn't want to be seen. She wanted a quiet moment with which to reconnect with the place she loved. She needed to say goodbye. Getting out of the car with her cappuccino in hand, Adeline walked the long stretch of crumbling dock toward the spot she considered her favorite. It was the spot where Nicolo and she had picnicked.
She remembered sitting with her feet dangling over the edge, and she thought of standing on the boat dock while Nicolo tried to coax her into the kayak. A smile reached Adeline's lips. Even though her heart ached, her memories were good. Dodging a pitted spot on the deck's surface, Adeline slowed as her surroundings changed. The portion of the dock that stretched out before her had been repaired. The crumbling edges had been fixed with new cement and rock. The pitted spots were fixed, and loose segments no longer rolled under her feet. Adeline turned around and looked at the dock's surface over which she had just walked. It was still damaged and crumbling, yet the other half of the dock was now fixed. Adeline turned her attention to the large 3-story building. She'd seen the renovation schedule, and fixing the dock wasn't on it until near the end. Turning back to look at the dock some more, she saw that the fixes had been completed with a fine skill. A lot of detailed effort had gone into it. The surface of the fixed areas was perfectly level with the original dockwork, and the surface of the rocks were not marred by excess cement. They had been wiped clean, so that they would be smooth for bare feet to walk across. A familiar voice reached her ears, even though the words were too faint for her to pick out. Turning, she looked back at the main building to see a tall man with broad shoulders and black hair coming out of its open front double doors. He was wearing a quarter-sleeve button-up shirt and khakis that were splotched with paint. On his feet were heavy work boots that had seen their share of a hard day's work. In the man's hand was a blue bucket that pulled down hard on his shoulder. In his other hand were a couple of trowels for working with plaster, and his pockets were stuffed with old rags. There was something familiar about the way the man moved, and it was not until the man stopped, frozen at the sight of Adeline, that she realized who she was seeing. "Nicolo!" Her exclamation was quiet and for her own ears. Her mind raced, trying to remember his schedule. She was sure that he was not due back in Sicily for at least another week. The man put the bucket and trowels on the ground. Then, in a jog that gained speed to a run, he covered the distance between them. 5 feet away, though, his run fell to a walk, and then he stopped just out of arm's reach. "Adeline," he whispered, with his hand over his heart. The smile he wore was like that of a man who had been reunited with a love he had thought long since dead. "What are you doing here?" Adeline felt silly asking the question. The Romano del Mare was Nicolo's birthright, after all. He owned it. Who was she to question his presence? She was the one who was trespassing. Nicolo held out his hands to his sides. "This is where I am now. I've come home, Adeline. I haven't left Sicily since that day in the restaurant." Adeline blinked as her body started to tremble. "You've come home just as I'm leaving?" Nicolo took a step closer, but did not reach out to touch her. "So you accepted the position in Spain?" Adeline nodded, not trusting her voice enough to speak. "If you will let me follow you," Nicolo said, gathering the tips of her fingers in his, "I will follow you. I will go to Spain with you, and I will be your full-time lover and the full-time father of our child." He took another step forward until there was only the merest threads of light between them. "My home is where you are, Adeline. We can be here or in Spain or in America. Wherever you lay your head, that is my home." "What about India?" Her voice shook as she asked the question. "I told them that family matters had determined that I cannot remain in the role of developer lead on that project." He smiled, warm and loving. "I quit. But then they rehired me 10 minutes later as a consultant with a task load that can be mostly performed from here." He then bobbed his head in the direction of the hotel. "Plus, this keeps me busy." Tears fell from Adeline's eyes. Kneeling in front of her, Nicolo took her drink from her hand and set it on the ground before taking both her hands in his. "Adeline Peluso, will you have me as your partner in life for us to face each and every adventure together? Will you let me lay my head on the pillow next to yours for the rest of our lives? Will you let me claim you as my home, my rock, my future, and my wife?" Adeline was nodding vigorously before she spoke. "Yes, yes!" He stood and pulled Adeline into his arms, picking her up and swinging her in a circle. Then, setting her down suddenly with alarmed, worried eyes, he asked, "Are you okay? Are you sick?" Adeline laughed,
and threw her arms round his neck and pulled him in for a kiss.
No, but I do have a craving for pistachio gelato, and I know of the best place.
Sexy, craving pregnant lady. You gonna send me out for pizza in the middle of the night?
Pizza with pickles.
Nicolo barked with laughter as he held her tight. Anything for you, ti amo. 15. Nicolo.
Oh, I'm nervous,
Adeline said, as she paced the room and shook her hands as if to flick water off them.
Are we making the right decision? They're both so much.
Nicolo was sitting in front of his computer screen, and on it were 2 different options to click on. One would purchase an immaculate villa that had a history of making amazing wine. The other was a sprawling mansion that was much bigger than the first, but it would require a lot of tender loving care, hard work, and money to fix up. Nicolo had liked the wine villa, but Adeline had fallen absolutely in love with the mansion that needed some help to reach its best. I'm going to do it. I'm going to choose. Do you trust me, Betta? Adeline stopped her pacing to face Nicolo. She looked as if she were waiting for the last lotto number of a matching set to be called out. Are you sure you don't want to be the one to make the final decision? He asked.
No. I've racked my brain for days. You do it.
Adeline bounced up and down on the balls of her feet. Her body was still as trim as ever, but now her belly had a very gentle roundness to it that Nicolo could feel when he would lay his hand on top of her bare stomach. Every day she grew more beautiful to him, and every day he fell more deeply in love. Nicolo looked at the 2 options before him and let the cursor go back and forth between the 2. Then, with a bright smile on his face that crinkled the corners of his eyes, he clicked, choosing the sprawling mansion that needed a lot of fixing up. It was the one that Adeline had loved best, and Nicolo had a surprise for her. He would have a helipad installed that could take them to the airstrip where their jet would remain and wait. It would stay there so that the world would be forever at their fingertips, and adventure would never be far away. Adeline had given him a home, a real home, with her. It had been the one thing that he'd never been able to give himself. Now he was going to give something to her. The world. It was now her playground. To go anywhere, to fly anywhere, to do anything. It was a small gift indeed compared to what she had given him. Nothing, not even the world, could compare to having a home. She had shown him what life looked like through her eyes, and he'd liked the view. It had a beautiful woman by his side who loved him for who he was, and not for what he could give her. And it had a child with her eyes, her laugh, and her smile. Their child. Their future. He was terrified and exhilarated, but he had no doubts and no regrets, despite the fact that she'd brought into his life the one thing that he'd always fought against. She'd given him roots. He'd thought that having roots would make him weaker, make him less flexible, and would stop him from growing. But he'd been wrong. So wrong. They'd made him stronger. They'd made him unstoppable. They'd made him feel more alive than he ever had before, all because he'd been a foolish man for a brilliant woman. The best mistake of his life. End of Italian Billionaire's Stubborn Lover. The Romano Brothers Series, Book 1. Thank you for listening. This has been Italian Billionaire's Stubborn Lover. The Romano Brothers Series, Book 1. Written by Leslie North. Read by Connor Brown. Copyright 2018 by Relay Publishing. Production copyright 2018 by Relay Publishing.